You are here, at the beginning of a long, slow journey. A journey without urgency, without pressure, without any need to hold on too tightly. You have come to rest for a while, to let words drift across your mind like clouds crossing a quiet sky. Think of this time as a space for stillness, a soft pause in the rhythm of your day. As you listen, you don't need to do anything at all. You are allowed to simply be carried, as though floating on a calm tide. And before we begin, a gentle invitation. If you'd like these quiet journeys to continue, consider subscribing. No pressure, no demand, just a soft note of gratitude that such support allows this space of reflection to exist. So now, let yourself settle. Feel the way your body begins to soften as you breathe. With each breath, imagine you are sinking a little deeper into the quiet, as though a warm current carries you toward a place of rest. Nothing needs to be solved. Nothing needs to be hurried. Time, for this moment, is abundant. We will move slowly together. The purpose of this journey is simple: to wander through a question that has hovered at the edges of philosophy, science, and story for centuries. What if Earth itself is a test? A test not in the strict or punishing sense, but as a space where something is quietly measured, where conditions have been arranged in a way that invites response. Perhaps it is a test of survival, or of compassion, or of awareness itself. Or perhaps it is nothing of the kind, only a world of matter and chance, where life simply arises and fades without design. Now, there is no need to answer. The value of the question is not in racing toward a conclusion, but in dwelling within the space it opens. Like a candle in a dark room, the question does not chase away every shadow, but it shapes the way we see. So, breathe. Settle deeper. Let the rhythm of your thoughts slow to match the rhythm of these words. Imagine Earth as a diary, its pages written not in ink, but in layers of stone and salt, in rivers and ridges, in the quiet patterns of fossils buried beneath our feet. Each page holds stories, though many are erased by time, rewritten by oceans, smudged by the movements of mountains. It is as if an editor, time itself, has crossed through much of what once was written, leaving only fragments. And from those fragments, we try to imagine the whole. If Earth were a test, the questions might not be written in words. They might be written in the flow of seasons, in the patterns of weather, in the slow dance of continents drifting apart and colliding. They might be whispered in the silence of stars that seem so distant, yet shape the very conditions that allow us to ask the question at all. But then, what if it is not a test? What if all this, oceans, forests, deserts, storms, is simply what happens when matter obeys simple laws across vast time? What if meaning is something we bring, rather than something placed here for us to discover? And maybe that is the more profound mystery, that we are here at all, conscious enough to ask, that we can look at the mountains and wonder not only how they rose, but whether their rising is part of something greater, that we can listen to our own hearts and question whether our compassion, our struggle, our mistakes are being weighed against some invisible measure. There is no need to decide. Tonight, we simply walk slowly through the landscape of possibility. We will follow trails that lead through science and history, through philosophy and speculation, sometimes clear, sometimes vanishing into mist. Each path may reveal something different, yet all will carry us back, again and again, to the same quiet wonder. What if Earth was a test? And what if it was not? Picture yourself as a traveler entering a vast library. The shelves stretch endlessly, in every direction, filled with volumes written in languages you may never fully understand. Some books are whole, some are damaged, others are missing entirely. And still, you wander, tracing your fingers across the spines, knowing that even fragments can guide you. That library is Earth itself, the geology, the biology, the civilizations, past and present. Some stories are legible, others lost. And perhaps part of the test, if such a thing exists, is whether we learn to read between the gaps. Notice the pace of your thoughts. If they begin to wander, that is perfectly fine. These words are not commands. They are only gentle currents you may follow or drift away from. If your attention fades, you are still within the journey. Even drifting is a form of listening. Think now of oceans. For billions of years, they have washed against the shore, recording the passing of time in grains of sand and lines of tide. If Earth were a test, the oceans might be the film reels on which every attempt, every success and failure has been recorded. Yet, like film left too long in the light, much has been blurred or erased. What remains is partial, faint, suggestive. This is how all evidence of the past reaches us. Faded, incomplete. Civilizations crumble, languages vanish, even entire species leave only traces of bone. Perhaps this is part of the design, if design there is. A test in which the questions are always half erased, where the challenge is not only to answer, but to imagine the missing lines. Or perhaps it is only entropy at work, the natural consequence of time's passage, indifferent and unshaped. You do not need to choose. Tonight, the value is in holding both possibilities together. Maybe it is a test, maybe it is not. Maybe it never could be. Each repetition opens the space a little wider, letting you rest within the uncertainty. And so, as this long journey begins, let the edges of the question soften. Do not hold it like a problem to be solved, but cradle it gently, as one cradles a fragile shell found on a beach. Its beauty lies not in certainty, but in wonder. Now, let us begin to wonder. The question lingers like mist in a valley at dawn. Is life a test? Is the world around us arranged as a stage upon which we are asked to perform? Or is it simply a garden, growing without plan, blooming in whatever direction chance allows? Both images carry their own quiet poetry. A stage suggests intention, a script, perhaps even an audience unseen in the shadows. A garden suggests abundance, growth for its own sake, beauty without any demand for outcome. When we ask if life is a test, we are not asking with urgency, but with the same wonder one feels when watching a river meander across a plain. The river may be carving its way according to hidden gradients, or it may seem to wander aimlessly, splitting and rejoining, leaving oxbow lakes as gentle scars across the land. Perhaps the river itself does not know. Perhaps it only flows. And so too with life. Maybe we are participants in an examination greater than ourselves, where each choice, each act of kindness or cruelty, each moment of awareness or neglect, is quietly measured against a standard we cannot see. Or maybe we are simply here, existing, because the conditions happen to allow it, just as moss gathers on a stone, not because it was meant to, but because it could. It is tempting to think of life as a classroom, the days as lessons, the years as exams, the relationships as group projects whose grades are hidden until the end. We might imagine the world as a great hall filled with desks, each of us bent over our papers, some confident, some anxious, some unsure of the questions themselves. Yet it might also be more fitting to think of life as a current in the sea, carrying us forward whether we learn or not, whether we resist or surrender. The current does not demand that we understand it. It only moves, and we move with it. Maybe both images are true. Maybe the classroom and the current are not opposites, but companions. Perhaps the current is the classroom. The flow of time and circumstance is the very setting in which we are invited to respond, to create, to learn. And yet, perhaps there is no test at all. Only flow, only being. Consider the play of chance. A single planet, tilted just so, orbiting at just the right distance, clothed in atmosphere, bathed in light. The conditions align, and life unfolds. From the simplest cell to the complexity of human thought, each step might appear like a question, answered. But it might just as well be an accident, a fortunate roll of cosmic dice. Perhaps it was not arranged to test us, but simply happened, as stars happen, as tides rise and fall. But still, there is something within us that wonders. We look at the sweep of history, at the rise and fall of civilizations, at the resilience of life across mass extinctions, and we feel as though something is being asked. Survival seems to be tested. Compassion seems to be tested. Awareness itself seems to be tested. And so we return again and again to the thought, is this merely survival, or is survival only the first question on an exam that continues deeper than we know? Imagine standing in a forest at night. The trees loom like dark pillars. The air hums with unseen life, and you feel at once small and significant. Small, because you are but one among countless forms of life. Significant, because you are able to notice, to stand and wonder what it all might mean. Perhaps that ability to notice is the true subject of the test, if there is one. Perhaps awareness is the hidden question, written between the lines, or maybe, once more, it is nothing of the sort. The forest grows because it can. The trees do not stand as examiners. The owls do not whisper answers. They are simply alive, as you are alive. The test, if you seek it, might be no more than the echo of your own longing for order. Notice how the thought bends in both directions. Perhaps life is weighed, perhaps it is not. Perhaps it is scripted, perhaps it is improvised. Each possibility feels both plausible and elusive, as though meaning itself is suspended just out of reach. And in that suspension lies the strange comfort. We do not need to decide. We only need to dwell in the possibility. Think of civilizations that once flourished and fell. Sumer, the Maya, forgotten cultures whose names we may never know. Did they pass or fail some hidden test? Or did they simply follow the natural rhythm of growth and decline as waves rise and break upon the shore? Perhaps every civilization is a student in a class without a teacher, where the only lesson is that nothing lasts forever. Or think of individuals, each of us with choices, triumphs, failures. Is the kindness of one person recorded as an answer on a cosmic page? Is the cruelty of another weighed on invisible scales? Or are these moments simply lived and then gone? Ripples that fade into the larger sea without judgment? Maybe it is both. Maybe it is neither. Maybe it never could be. The power of the question is not in the certainty it gives, but in the space it opens. Asking whether life is a test is itself a kind of awakening. It stretches the imagination. It softens the edges of our assumptions. It invites us to see the world as layered, as mysterious, as more than it first appears. Even if the answer is no, the asking shapes the way we live. And so, we hold the image lightly. Earth as a stage, Earth as a garden, life as a classroom, life as a current. Each image glimmers like a lantern, casting light on part of the path, but never the whole. Perhaps the lantern is enough. Perhaps it is not the destination, but the light itself that matters. For now, we let the question rest. We let it breathe within us like a quiet tide. And as we move forward, we carry it not as a burden, but as an invitation. An invitation to look more closely, to listen more deeply, to wonder more gently. Because if life is a test, then the act of wondering may already be part of it. And if it is not, then the wondering is still a gift. One more way of being fully alive. And so, the path opens, not with answers, but with further curiosity. We will ask again, if there is a test, who or what is observing? And if there is not, why does the world feel as though questions are hidden everywhere, waiting to be found? Now, let us drift further. Time waits in ways we can scarcely imagine. It does not hurry, does not demand, does not raise its voice. It stretches like an endless horizon, patient, steady, watching as all things rise and pass away. If life were ever a test, perhaps it is not judged by a sudden glance or a quick result, but by the quiet gaze of time itself. Time does not hold a stopwatch in its hand, but rather an ocean in its palm. The flow of centuries is as natural to it as a single breath is to us. Generations appear, live their stories, and fade into memory, each one like a sentence written in the long text of Earth. Perhaps those sentences are the answers to questions too vast for us to see. Perhaps each generation is a response, an attempt, a line in a dialogue unfolding across millennia. Think of stone. Beneath our feet, the earth carries records that stretch back billions of years. Layers of rock pressed upon layers, like pages in a book written without ink. Each layer speaks of an age, the rise of oceans, the retreat of glaciers, the slow crawl of mountains thrust upward, only to be worn down again. If we bend close, we can almost read them. Fossils pressed like annotations. In the margins, ash lines telling of firestorms and eruptions. Sediment showing the patience of rivers. In this way, Earth seems to keep time's diary. Not written by hand, but by breath and tide, by heat and silence. If we imagine Earth as a test, then these layers are the examination papers filled not with numbers or words, but with patterns of life and loss. Each epoch a question posed, each extinction a dramatic pause, each renewal a tentative answer. Biology writes upon those pages as well. The slow evolution of life is like a script unfolding, where each species is both response and experiment. The trilobite answered in one way, flourishing for millions of years before fading. The dinosaurs answered differently, and their reply lasted even longer. Then came mammals, then humans, each turn another attempt, another line on the exam sheet of existence. Whether successful or not depends on what question is being asked. Yet we are not certain what that question is. Perhaps time itself is the examiner, not in the sense of judging us with red ink, but simply by watching, by holding the record. Time does not erase. It accumulates. It allows the slow writing of history to continue. Never impatient, always open. What survives is kept. What fades is still remembered, in its own way, pressed into the fossil record, carried in the genetic traces of descendants, etched in the subtle chemistry of soil and air. If time is an examiner, it is unlike any human one. It does not rush to results. It waits eons for an answer. Imagine a question written in the age of trilobites, finally answered in the age of humans. Imagine a test that spans not hours, not years, but billions of years, with each participant adding a single syllable to the reply. Perhaps Earth itself is engaged in such a dialogue, time asking, life answering, endlessly and without conclusion. There is a quiet humility in this thought. We are not the sole students in this imagined classroom. We are one among countless others who have written their marks before us. The coral reefs, the forests, the birds that migrate across oceans. They too are scribes in this long script. Our answers overlap theirs, layered like voices in a chorus, sometimes harmonious, sometimes discordant. When you look at a mountain range, you are seeing time's handwriting. When you walk through a desert and notice the ripple of sand dunes, you are seeing the punctuation of winds that have moved for centuries. When you gaze at the night sky, the stars themselves are time's annotations, some shining from so far away that their light began its journey before humans ever learned to speak. In this sense, time is not only an observer, it is a witness that records everything, a vast archivist who keeps no secrets, who loses nothing. But if time is the examiner, then what is it asking? Perhaps it wonders whether life can endure. Perhaps the question is whether consciousness will learn to live with its own awareness. Perhaps it asks nothing at all. And we are the ones who project our longing for meaning onto its silence. Even so, the silence itself becomes part of the dialogue. Imagine Earth as a great book. The cover is made of stone. The pages are written in oceans and forests, and the ink is made from the breath of all living things. Every storm is a line. Every extinction is a pause. Every dawn is a renewal of the text. We are characters within it, but also readers, able to notice the story we are part of, even if we cannot see how it ends. Sometimes the book seems chaotic, written without structure, filled with sudden twists and tragedies. But perhaps that is the point. Perhaps the book is not meant to be simple, not meant to give easy answers. Perhaps the very complexity is itself the subject of the examination. Can we bear to live in a story we do not fully understand? Can we find beauty in its uncertainty? Think of your own life as a single line within this immense script. A life of decades set against the backdrop of billions of years is like a word whispered in a library. Yet even a whisper matters. Even a single word shapes the meaning of the sentence in which it is placed. We are both small and essential. Our lives may not answer the test in full, but they contribute something, a nuance, a shade, a fragment of response that belongs to the greater whole. And so we arrive at the quiet recognition. Time is both gentle and unyielding. It gives us space to grow, yet it carries us forward whether we are ready or not. It lets us write upon its pages, yet it never turns back a leaf. Its gaze is not cruel, but it is absolute. Nothing escapes it. Everything, in one way or another, is witnessed. If life is a test, perhaps it is not measured in success or failure, but simply in persistence. To endure, to adapt, to continue writing, maybe that is the reply time waits for. Or perhaps the very act of wondering is enough. The acknowledgement that we are aware of the exam paper before us. For now, we need not know the answer. It is enough to feel the patience of time around us, to sense its vast silence stretching through the stones, through the air, through the stars themselves. Time watches, but it does not hurry. It is content to let the question linger. And so we wonder, softly, if time is the examiner, what are we being asked? What, after all, makes something a test? A test does not simply appear. It is defined by the rules that govern it, the conditions that shape it, and the outcomes it seeks to reveal. In classrooms, a test is a sheet of paper, a handful of questions, a score tallied at the end. In laboratories, it is an experiment with measured inputs and carefully observed results. A test is not only about activity, it is about evaluation. Something is being weighed, something is being measured, whether we see it or not. If Earth were a test, what is being measured here? Perhaps it is survival, the simplest and most obvious measure of all. Life arises, adapts, endures. The forms that cannot endure fade quietly, leaving only fossils as their faint signatures. In this view, the planet asks a straightforward question. Can you remain? Can you find a way to stay through storms, ice, fire, and change? Survival itself becomes the answer written again and again across trilobites, reptiles, mammals, and us. Or perhaps the measure is cooperation. Life is not only about enduring individually, but about existing together. Forests thrive because trees exchange nutrients through their roots. Coral reefs blossom through the delicate balance of countless species intertwined. Even humanity's survival has depended on cooperation, sharing food, ideas, protection. If Earth is a test, maybe it is asking, will you learn to live not as isolated fragments, but as interconnected beings? Then again, perhaps the measure is morality. We are creatures capable of reflection, of imagining not only what is, but what should be. We notice suffering, and we feel compelled to respond. We sense injustice, and we try, sometimes clumsily, sometimes nobly, to correct it. If Earth is testing us, maybe the question is whether consciousness brings compassion. Maybe the hidden page of the exam asks, can awareness give rise to care? And yet, there is another possibility. Perhaps the test measures awareness itself. Simply noticing might be the point. A flower bends toward sunlight without knowing it does so, but we can pause and reflect on the bending, on the sunlight, on the miracle of growth. We can ask why there is something instead of nothing. Perhaps the act of wondering is itself the criterion, proof that consciousness has not only arisen, but has turned back upon itself in curiosity. Human tests are small, bounded things. They have clear beginnings and ends, tidy rubrics, and neat scores. But a cosmic test, if it exists, may be far less structured, far more open. Its rules may be hidden, its outcomes unknown, its very questions half veiled in mystery. And if there is no examiner at all, no teacher with a red pen, no authority waiting for results, then perhaps the word test is only a metaphor we cast upon the vastness. Maybe it is survival. Maybe it is cooperation. Maybe it is morality. Maybe it is awareness. Maybe it is all of these, or none. Maybe the test is not a test at all, but a mirror we hold up to our own wondering minds. Maybe it is, maybe it isn't. Maybe it never was. Still, the shape of the idea lingers. To imagine life as a test is to imagine purpose, a direction, a meaning woven into the quiet fabric of existence. To imagine life as not a test is to imagine openness, freedom, chance unfolding without destination. Both images are calming in their own way. One reassures us that there is order, that we are being guided toward something. The other reassures us that there is no burden, no hidden score to fear. If there is shape to this test, it is broad and encompassing. It would not be written only for humans. The rivers and the winds, the whales and the bees, the forests and the stones, all would be participants, all would be part of the answering chorus. To limit the exam to our species alone would be to miss the deeper continuity, the vast symphony of life unfolding together. Perhaps, then, the most we can say is that the shape of a test is not found in rules or grades, but in the act of living itself. To exist, to feel, to breathe, to change. These are answers given every moment, regardless of whether anyone is marking them down. And so, the question expands. If life is not only ours, but the shared presence of all things, then perhaps the test, if it exists, belongs to the Earth itself. Not a test set for us, but a test we take together, knowingly or not, which leads us gently outward toward a larger wonder. If the shape of the test is not only human, then what might it look like? When written across the breadth of all living things, we have wandered gently, circling the idea like a stone smoothed by water. We have asked what it means for life to be a test, and we have looked at it from the edges, through survival, through cooperation, through morality, through awareness. We have spoken of time as a patient observer, and of earth as a book written by stone and breath. And yet, for all our wondering, we have not answered, and perhaps that is how it should be. Some questions are not meant to be solved but held, like a seashell pressed to the ear. You hear the ocean's whisper inside it, though the waves are far away. You cannot seize the sea by grasping tighter. You can only listen. These first reflections are seashells in our hands, humming with possibilities, never needing to resolve into finality. So here, before we step further, let us pause. Let us rest with the not knowing. It is enough for now to have opened the door of wondering, to have let the air of possibility drift in. We do not need to walk through quickly. We do not need to rush toward certainty. If your mind has drifted, if your eyes grow heavy, that too is all right. The questions will only grow softer, not harder, as we move on. This story is not a riddle demanding answers. It is a river meant to be floated upon. Even if you fall asleep and awaken much later, the current will still be here, carrying you gently onward. Nothing is lost. Consider how night itself teaches us this. Each evening, the world darkens, and we allow ourselves to let go. We close our eyes without demanding clarity. We surrender not because we have solved the day, but because the body longs for rest. In that way, perhaps sleep is the truest metaphor for our inquiry. To sleep is to accept mystery, to drift without grasping, to trust the unseen current to hold us. So let this be reassurance. You are not required to keep every thread. You may drift in and out. You may notice some thoughts and let others pass. The story will wait. It will stretch out like a horizon, moving slowly, always ready for you to rejoin whenever you wish. If Earth is a test, then we need not fear the questions. They come without pressure, without grading, without judgment. They arrive softly, as clouds arrive over a meadow. They gather, change shape, and drift on. Our task is not to master them, but simply to notice their passing. And as we close this first movement of reflection, we can let anticipation rise, not sharp or urgent, but like the glow before dawn. The questions we have asked: what is a test? What does time measure? What role do we play? Are only the beginning. Beyond them lies a larger imagining. If there were such a test, how might it have been set? What conditions would shape it? Who or what might have placed the pieces in motion? Next, we will step into that wondering. we will imagine the frame of a cosmic experiment, not as proof or conclusion, but as story, as metaphor, as possibility. The journey will not hurry. It will unfold gently, as the tide unfolds across the shore. So let us settle for now. Let us rest in the stillness between questions. This is the calm before the journey. The air is quiet, the path is open, and the horizon waits. When we move again, we will begin to wonder how a test might be set. Now, let us drift further into the thought of how such a test might even be set. If life were to unfold as an experiment, then the stage itself must first be prepared. And what a stage it is! The Earth, a sphere of rock and water, circling its star in a vast and quiet sea of space. Perhaps the preparation began long before we ever arrived, long before even the earliest cells stirred in ancient oceans. Think of a laboratory, carefully arranged so that conditions are just right. The temperature must be stable, the materials present, the variables allowed to interact. In some sense, Earth offers this very picture, a planet not too close to the sun, where seas would boil, nor too far away, where they would freeze. A place where water can flow, where carbon can bond, where atmospheres can shelter the fragile dance of molecules. If we step back far enough, it looks almost like calibration, as though the settings have been tuned until they fall into a narrow band that allows life to flourish. Scientists call it the Goldilocks zone, the orbital range where conditions are neither too harsh nor too mild, but just right for liquid water. But the metaphor goes further. For countless cosmic worlds, the dials seem turned a little too far, tilted toward chaos. And yet, here, on this pale blue dot, the conditions balanced in a way that permitted beginnings. Perhaps it was chance. Perhaps it was necessity. Or perhaps it was the stage being set, an experiment waiting to unfold. Imagine the early Earth as a laboratory table. The surface cools, oceans condense, volcanic fire breathes gases into the sky. Lightning strikes across storms, catalyzing new bonds. Hydrothermal vents bubble in the deep sea, spewing mineral-rich waters that cradle the first fragile assemblies of life. These are like the initial sparks of an experiment, the moment reagents swirl together in a beaker, forming something new. Out of such accidents, or designs, comes the slow unfurling of biology. The stage of an experiment is not only the setup, but also the boundaries. A test has edges, limits that contain the unfolding process. Earth itself is such a boundary, surrounded by the vacuum of space. Beyond the thin veil of atmosphere, life cannot easily cross. Within this fragile envelope, however, endless complexity has been allowed to blossom. Perhaps that is the test's frame, an island sealed by void, where life can rise, adapt, compete, and weave its many forms. And yet, a test is never merely about the space provided. It is also about time, for the stage must endure long enough for the drama to play out. Earth has circled the sun for over 4 billion years, giving stability across immense spans. Stars burn, galaxies collide, but within this narrow orbit, the experiment continues. What other lab could run for billions of years without pause? Perhaps none. Perhaps that endurance is itself the rarest condition of all. Even the moon plays its part. Its steady pull shapes the tides, stirring the seas in a rhythm that may have nurtured the first fragile chains of chemistry. Its light-guided migrations, its presence steadied Earth's spin. If one were arranging a stage for life's long unfolding, this companion satellite would seem a necessary instrument. A tuning fork resonating with the rhythms of the oceans. Was it accident, or intention, or simply another step in a story that writes itself? And the sun, stable, middle-aged, not too erratic, not too dim, provides light without chaos. There are stars that flare violently, stars that consume their planets, stars that die too quickly for life to arise. Yet ours has burned steadily, offering warmth and energy across eons. If we imagine an experiment, then the sun is both lamp and clock, both light source and timer, marking the passage of ages with its patient rise and fall. If you drift while considering these conditions, that is all right. They will wait, like the earth itself waits, holding the stage steady while the play of existence unfolds. For whether this was all chance or design or some blending of both, the outcome is the same, a world able to sustain the fragile miracle of life. What is most striking is how finely tuned the balances appear. Gravity strong enough to hold an atmosphere, but not so strong as to crush life beneath it. A magnetic field to shield against cosmic radiation. A tilt of the axis that brings seasons, neither endless winter nor endless summer. These details are like settings on a delicate instrument, each dial resting in a narrow range where life can sing. Perhaps coincidence, perhaps necessity, perhaps the deliberate arrangement of a stage prepared long ago. And so, when we imagine Earth as a test, we might begin here, with the setup, the frame, the laboratory conditions that allowed the experiment to begin. Without them, no trial could be run, no question asked, no answer written in the language of life. The stage came first, silent and waiting, like a canvas stretched before the first brush stroke. From here, the thought unfolds into what might be asked upon such a stage. If the conditions are the setup, then what is the task? What kind of trial would life itself be part of? Soon, we will turn to that wondering. Carrying that thought onward, the stage alone is never the whole of a test. A stage may be vast and rich, but without rules, without boundaries, the play would unravel into chaos. Perhaps then, what we call natural laws are themselves the quiet instructions, the invisible text that guides every movement of matter and life. Gravity, always patient, drawing oceans into tides, pulling seeds back to the soil when the wind has carried them too far. Light, spilling from the sun, not wildly or without order, but following the predictable rhythm of dawn and dusk. Chemistry, itself, binding elements with steadfast consistency, so that water is always water and salt is always salt. These are the rules no one reads, yet all obey. Imagine sitting at a desk, a sheet of paper in front of you, inked with faint lines. Without needing to be told, you place your words between them. You follow margins, you trace shapes. In the same way, every atom follows the lines inscribed by physics. The ink of the cosmos tells them where to move, where to rest, where to combine. They do not question, for they cannot. Their obedience is perfect, absolute. The instructions are not spoken aloud, yet they define the entire exam. Perhaps that is the most remarkable part, that these rules are not seen, but felt. You never notice gravity until you leap. Never think of chemistry until a flame flickers, or a drop of rain clings to glass. The laws whisper rather than declare. They are not invigilators walking the aisles, but the air itself, the structure of the page, the very reason anything can exist long enough to be tested at all. If Earth is a trial, then these laws are the silent scaffolding that shapes the possible. And what a peculiar kind of exam it would be. where the instructions are not handed to you in clear language, but are written into the paper of reality itself. You cannot read them, yet you cannot escape them. Even as you drift now, your body obeys countless rules: cells exchanging ions, blood carrying oxygen, lungs drawing in air, each process unfolding because the instructions of physics and biology permit it. Without those rules, no drifting, no dreaming, no questioning could exist. There is wonder in this hidden script. Were these laws always present, lying in wait for matter to awaken and follow them? Or were they placed, deliberately or otherwise, like boundaries in a garden, fences that both protect and confine? A particle cannot decide to ignore the pull of mass, nor can light refuse to bend. Perhaps it is not unlike students in a hall who must answer within the limits given. No one may change the length of the paper. No one may add questions of their own. And yet, while we see them as rules, they may not be rules at all, but simply patterns. The way frost always blooms into crystals, the way rivers always carve valleys, the way stars always collapse into spheres. Is that law? Or is it habit, the rhythm of the universe repeating itself with infinite patience? The distinction may not matter, yet it lingers in the mind. Are these boundaries discovered, or were they placed? Did we stumble upon them, or did they wait for us, prepared long before our gaze? If you think of water always flowing downhill, you might hear the faintest echo of instruction, not spoken, not written, but inscribed in the very relationship between matter and space. If you think of fire, always consuming, always releasing heat, there too is a lesson that no one taught, yet everyone learns. The universe is full of such quiet directions, and life, in its many forms, learns to navigate them as if they were part of a curriculum. Wings adjust to air, roots bend toward water, eyes evolve to see light. Existence itself becomes a long obedience to invisible rules. Perhaps that is the test, not to fight the laws, but to flourish within them, not to bend them, but to adapt, to listen, to move with their flow. The smallest bacterium follows them, just as surely as the grandest galaxy. Even the stars themselves, burning so brightly, are obeying equations of mass and pressure, equations written before any star was born. The cosmos is not wild chaos, but something closer to music, each note struck in rhythm with the hidden score. And still, the question hovers: were these rules inevitable or intentional? Some physicists speak of universes that might have been, worlds where gravity was stronger or weaker, or absent entirely. Worlds where chemistry never knit atoms into complexity. Worlds where light bent differently, or did not exist at all. Those worlds, if they exist, might be empty, silent, unable to host any experiment. By comparison, ours feels finely balanced, as though tuned to allow this long unfolding. Whether by chance or design, it remains a place where laws and life intertwine. For you, drifting now, these thoughts may seem like distant echoes. That is all right. The rules do not vanish when you do not see them. They are patient, waiting, always present. They hold you even in your sleep, just as they hold mountains in place and galaxies in orbit. They are the invisible instructions that give shape to everything, from the smallest sigh to the oldest star. From here, the path bends naturally toward biology itself. If the laws are the silent instructions, then life is the student that learns. Within them, the rules set the conditions, but biology writes the answers. Soon, we will drift into that unfolding, how living forms have interpreted the invisible script, shaping themselves into endless variations of response. From here, the Ayaviti story leans gently into life itself, which may be the truest curriculum we know. If natural laws are the silent instructions, then living things are the students who have been interpreting them for billions of years. Every cell, every organism, every branching lineage could be read as an answer written onto the page of time. Evolution becomes a kind of practice test, where each attempt is scored not with marks in red ink, but with survival, with continuation, with persistence into the next generation. Extinction, by contrast, is the quiet grading. When the answer given does not align with the rules, the lineage closes, its place in the exam forever marked as incomplete. Picture the earliest microbes drifting through primeval seas, tiny students fumbling with their first attempts at existence. Some solved the puzzle of energy by harnessing sunlight, others by consuming chemical gradients. Many failed, disappearing into the silence of the past. But a few succeeded, passing their lessons forward. Over time, new challenges appeared. How to move, how to sense, how to protect, how to endure. Each one a question the environment posed, and each lineage a different attempt at writing an answer. Predation brought another exam altogether. To survive, some developed teeth, claws, speed. Others, armor, camouflage, cunning. The test was never fixed. With each innovation came new problems, and with each new problem came new solutions. Cooperation arose alongside conflict, as though two exams were always running side by side. Predators hunted, yes, but elsewhere, cells joined into colonies, symbiosis took root, and the first networks of mutual benefit formed. Perhaps both tests mattered equally, the one of competition and the one of partnership. Maybe Earth was asking, can life endure by struggle alone? Or does endurance also require union? And slowly, something stranger emerged. Awareness. A faint glimmer at first. The ability to sense light, to recognize movement, to turn toward nourishment or away from danger. This was not merely physical survival, but the beginnings of perception, the sketching of minds. From sensing light to forming memory, from reacting to planning, from instinct to choice. If the curriculum of life had begun with survival and cooperation, perhaps awareness was the final question waiting at the end of the exam. What does it mean to not only live, but to know that you live? Yet even here we must hedge, for perhaps there was no curriculum at all. Perhaps what we read as lessons are only random branchings, some thriving by chance, others failing by misfortune. Evolution may not be a classroom but a blind scribe, writing endlessly without intent, without direction. Awareness might not be the final question, only an incidental scribble that happened to endure. The pattern may be in our eyes, not in the process itself. Still, whether random or intentional, the record remains. The fossil beds, the DNA sequences, the traces left in stone and molecule alike, all speak of attempts, failures, and fleeting triumphs. For you drifting now, it may feel like listening to the softest of lectures, one not demanding attention but offering possibilities. Life, in its many forms, may be seen as a series of essays written under invisible conditions, essays graded not by a teacher, but by time itself. Some answers proved robust enough to continue, others faded, and in this rhythm we find the only continuity nature offers: adaptation, change, impermanence. And within that long curriculum, humans eventually entered the stage, a new student, one carrying all the lessons of its predecessors, yet also holding something unique: the capacity not only to answer the questions of survival, but to ask new questions of its own. Soon, we will drift further into that shift, into the point where awareness deepened into reflection, and reflection into curiosity about whether life itself is a test at all. Now let us drift into the thought that humanity itself might be a candidate in this long, unending test. For billions of years, life played out its lessons without awareness, following instructions written in chemistry, in hunger, in chance. But somewhere along the way, a particular branch of life gained the ability not only to endure, but to notice, to look around and wonder, to see beyond instinct, to step outside of mere survival and ask, what does it mean? That shift, consciousness, might be the moment the exam changed. Perhaps, for the first time, the student realized there was a test. At all. Myths were among the earliest answers, stories whispered by firelight, woven into ritual and song. They carried explanations for thunder, for death, for the order of the stars. In them we find humanity's first essays on meaning, early drafts of attempts to understand why the world felt both nurturing and cruel. Religions followed, building structures of belief, each offering a syllabus for life, instructions for conduct, visions of reward or consequence, reasons for the trials of existence. Whether they were right or not may never be known. What matters here is that humans were trying to read the questions written into reality and to offer responses that satisfied the deep unease of not knowing. And as myths turned into codes, morality emerged as another possible exam question. What does one do when survival can be gained by harm, but cooperation offers something subtler, longer lasting? Empathy, the ability to feel another's joy or pain, may itself be a test of awareness. It asks not only whether we can survive, but whether we can carry each other through survival. Societies formed on these foundations, on law, on custom, on shared understanding of fairness, even when fairness meant sacrifice. Perhaps Earth is not measuring who endures, but how they endure. You, listening now, can sense the quiet contrast. Animals answered with tooth and claw, instinct and adaptation. Humanity began to answer with language, with art, with the ability to look back at itself and judge. Survival became the minimum. Meaning became the challenge. It may be that in this exam, the higher marks are not for the strongest or even the cleverest, but for those who can ask what strength and cleverness should serve. But we must pause to acknowledge the uncertainty. Perhaps there is no exam at all, no hidden grade waiting in the wings. Maybe morality and empathy are simply evolutionary tools, byproducts of social survival, strategies written in neurons rather than questions set by an examiner. The test may be an illusion born from our tendency to see patterns, to weave order into chaos. Even so, the illusion persists because consciousness itself cannot help but interpret. Whether real or imagined, the idea of being measured shapes the way we live. Across cultures, we find echoes of this. Ancient texts speaking of judgment after death, of weighing the heart against a feather, of returning to the wheel of existence until lessons are learned. These may be different answers, but they share a common suspicion that life is not only about enduring, but about becoming. About being shaped by the conditions of existence until something more refined, more aware, emerges. Perhaps the test is not pass or fail, but simply transformation. And what of modern times? Science, philosophy, literature. Each continues the pattern, offering new ways of asking the same old questions. From the equations of physics to the verses of poets, we return again and again to the suspicion that our place here is not arbitrary, that it might signify something. Yet even in the absence of certainty, we continue. Maybe this persistence itself is an answer. Humanity's refusal to stop wondering, to stop seeking meaning, might be part of what is being measured. For you, adrift now in this narration, think of it gently. Perhaps you are a candidate, not in a harsh exam hall, but in a dreamlike test where every choice, every kindness, every reflection is part of an unseen pattern. And yet, you need not strain to solve it. In this telling, there is no rush, no time limit, no single correct response. There is only the steady unfolding of existence and the chance to notice its textures as they pass. But if we are candidates, if humanity is indeed seated at this vast table of examination, one quiet question lingers. Where is the examiner? Who, if anyone, is reading these essays we call lives? That is the path we drift toward next, into the mystery of whether the test has a witness, or whether it is written only for the silence of time itself. Carrying that thought onward, we arrive at the unsettling quiet that seems to surround us. A test, in human terms, usually carries the weight of an examiner's presence. A teacher pacing gently at the edges of a classroom, the rustle of papers, the occasional cough that reminds the students they are not unseen. Yet here, in the grand theater of existence, such a figure does not step forward. The skies do not open to hand us the rules. No voice calls out the questions. There is only silence, so deep it sometimes feels deliberate. That silence could be read as absence. Perhaps there is no examiner at all, only an empty hall where we imagine oversight because we are accustomed to it. But perhaps, too, the silence is itself part of the exam. To act as though watched when no watcher reveals themselves. To choose kindness or curiosity or endurance not because of external pressure, but because it arises from within. Maybe the examiner hides precisely to see what unfolds when guidance is withheld. Consider the ant farm, a familiar human pastime. To the ants, the glass walls and human eyes beyond them are invisible, irrelevant. Their tunnels, their tiny wars and alliances unfold without awareness of the larger gaze. The observer watches, records, learns, but never interferes except in subtle ways, offering food, changing light, rearranging terrain. What if, in some vast analogy, our world is much the same? Perhaps we are digging our tunnels, crafting our societies, unaware of the presence that waits silently outside the frame. Or think of simulations, coded into computers by human designers. Within them, artificial creatures act, compete, cooperate, and evolve, never knowing that their choices are being watched. From their perspective, the rules of their world, gravity, light, decay, are simply givens, not chosen conditions. But to us, outside, those rules are parameters, carefully set. If Earth were such a simulation, we too might be bound by invisible lines of code, never catching more than the faintest glimpse of the boundary. And yet, the absence persists. Unlike an ant farm, no hand lowers food from the sky in unmistakable form. Unlike simulations, no programmer's signature appears on the landscape. If there is an examiner, they are the most discreet one imaginable. And in that discretion lies a peculiar tension. Perhaps the real test is not in answering questions posed aloud, but in writing our answers freely, without confirmation that anyone will ever read them. For you drifting now, it may feel like standing in a hall with endless desks, countless papers, being written, but no sound of footsteps, no indication of supervision. It is both liberating and disquieting. Liberating, because it means every word written is truly your own. Disquieting, because the silence leaves us unsure if the effort matters. Yet maybe that is exactly the point. to create meaning even when none is guaranteed, to live as though observed even in solitude. Philosophers have long wrestled with this. Some have said that the absence of evidence is itself the evidence, that if a higher order wished to test us, concealment would be the truest way to see how we act. Others argue that absence speaks for itself, and that to search for an examiner is to project our human habits onto a reality that needs no overseer. Both voices have their weight, and both dissolve, in the end, into the same stillness. Imagine, then, that the silence is neither confirmation nor denial. It is simply the condition of the test. A hush so profound that it forces us to lean inward, to seek the examiner within ourselves. Maybe that is the strange inversion, that we are not only the candidates, but also the evaluators, judging our own essays, setting our own criteria for success. If so, then the absence of a visible examiner is less a mystery, more a mirror. And still, one cannot help but wonder if the signs are hidden in plain sight. If the examiner's handwriting is the very fabric of natural law, the whisper of constance, the uncanny fit of the universe for life. Perhaps the silence is not empty at all, but filled with a language we have not yet learned to read. A language written in the stars, in the geometry of snowflakes, in the improbable persistence of consciousness itself. Soon, we will drift into that suspicion that perhaps the test is not merely overseen, but encoded into the very structures around us, waiting to be recognized. For now, let the silence remain with you, a companion rather than a void, the hush of a room where the questions have already been placed, even if the examiner never shows their face. Now, let us drift further into the quiet fabric that seems to underlie all things. If Earth were a test, perhaps the instructions are not written in words at all, but in the laws of physics themselves, silent boundaries that shape every possibility, without ever announcing their presence. Gravity pulls, light travels, time flows, and within these currents, existence unfolds as though following the margins of a carefully prepared page. The constants are strangely precise. Gravity is weak compared to electromagnetism, yet not so weak that stars cannot form. The speed of light is fixed, shaping how energy moves and how causality is preserved. Electrons carry a charge so finely tuned that atoms remain stable. Chemistry unfolds predictably, and matter does not unravel into chaos. If these numbers were even slightly altered, stars might burn too quickly, or never ignite at all. Worlds could collapse before life begins, or spread so thin across emptiness that complexity could never arise. It is this balance, so fragile, and yet so enduring, that invites the question, are these coincidences or calibrations? Some scientists call it fine-tuning, not in the sense of intent, but in the recognition that the parameters fall within narrow ranges that allow life to exist. Others resist the term, suggesting that if we were not here, we simply would not notice. Still, the thought lingers. The universe could have been otherwise, and the way it is allows for us to sit here, breathing, listening, wondering. Imagine the test page laid before a student. The margins are already drawn, the ink lines straight and clear. The student does not have to create the space in which to write. It is given. Perhaps physics serves this same role, not telling us what to answer, but shaping the room in which answers may be written. Gravity ensures worlds coalesce. Electromagnetism allows atoms to bond. Nuclear forces hold stars together until they scatter the heavy elements that seed new planets. The ink itself tells us where to write, not by words, but by possibility. You might think of planetary orbits circling in stable rhythm for billions of years. Without such predictability, Earth could never have settled into its gentle dance around the sun, carrying oceans, seasons, and the fragile balance of climate, or of water molecules shaped by hydrogen bonds, forming ice that floats, oceans that circulate, clouds that carry rain. These are not accidents in the everyday sense. They are conditions, boundaries, quiet rules written deep in the structure of reality. And yet, we must be cautious. To say these rules are instructions is to lean into metaphor. Perhaps they are simply outcomes of deeper mathematics, inevitabilities that seem tuned only because we are here to notice them. Or perhaps there are countless universes, most barren, with only this one falling into the narrow range where life emerges. We cannot rule it out. Still, for those listening, drifting, it is not certainty that matters, but the invitation to marvel at how precise, how unlikely, how stable this place is. For billions of years, these laws have held. Mountains rise and wear away. Civilizations grow and fall, but the constants remain. They provide continuity, a silent backdrop against which all change is staged. The speed of light does not flicker. The charge of the electron does not shift. Gravity pulls with the same quiet persistence. It always has. If there is a test, these may be the only written instructions, utterly consistent, impossible to alter, silently directing every page that follows. Perhaps the laws are the examiner's only visible presence, the faintest handwriting left behind. Or perhaps they are simply the necessary scaffolding of a reality that needs no examiner at all. Either way, they are the frame through which everything else is drawn, the ink that fills the margins, the guidance no one asked for, but all must follow. Soon, though, we must look beyond the ink itself. Physics lays out the rules, yes, but it does not tell us what the page is for. If the laws are the margins, then what is the paper, the medium upon which the answers are written? That question leads us gently toward the next layer of wonder. Now, if physics is the ink upon the page, then one may wonder about the page itself, and even about the hand that holds it. For some, the ink and the margins whisper not of blind chance, but of something like code, an architecture beneath appearances, invisible yet pervasive. This is the realm of a modern speculation, the idea that perhaps we live within a simulation, an experiment nestled in the circuitry of some greater mind. The thought is disarming in its simplicity. If civilizations endure long enough, advancing far beyond our current reach, then their tools would swell into powers we can scarcely imagine. Just as children today play with simulations of ecosystems, entire digital worlds teeming with creatures of code, so too might a distant intelligence simulate not only forests and rivers, but the unfolding of entire universes. It would be natural, even inevitable, that some of those universes would contain beings like us, curious, self-aware, asking whether their world is real. The hypothesis is not an assertion, but a mirror. If we can simulate small worlds, why should we assume ours is exempt from being one as well? Yet to rest with the metaphor of circuitry alone would be too narrow. One could imagine the simulation not as machines humming in some sterile chamber, but as thought itself, the imagination of a mind vast beyond reckoning. The Earth might be an experiment held gently in memory, each law and constant unfolding. Like a rule of language, each life a sentence written upon that mind's unfolding dream. Whether computational or contemplative, the essence remains. Our reality could be framed, contained, shaped by a structure larger than we can see. Hints of such framing appear in the peculiar texture of physics itself. Quantum mechanics, for example, resists the solidity we once believed in. At its smallest scales, the world does not unfold like stone and wood, but more like the flicker of a screen, granular, pixelated, defined by probabilities rather than certainties. Particles appear and vanish, blurred between existence and absence, as though the universe renders itself only when observed. To some, this strangeness feels less like an accident of mathematics and more like the efficiency of a system conserving resources, revealing detail only when the gaze demands it. There are other curiosities. The speed of light stands like a hard ceiling, no matter how forcefully one might try to push beyond it. Energy levels, atomic structures, the distribution of galaxies, all unfold with the elegance of constraints chosen with care. It is not difficult to compare them to the rules of a simulation, boundaries set so the unfolding game neither collapses into chaos nor drifts into stillness. If the margins of a test page confine our writing, perhaps the constants of physics confine the shape of our cosmos. But every alluring idea gathers shadows, and this one is no exception. For while the simulation hypothesis offers a frame for wonder, it is also nearly impossible to verify. A creature living within a dream cannot easily step outside to prove that the dream has boundaries. Evidence, if any exists, may be indistinguishable from the structure of reality itself. A pattern that looks like code may simply be mathematics. A boundary that feels like design may only be the natural limit of the possible. In this way, the hypothesis risks becoming unfalsifiable. A thought. One can circle forever, yet never pin to the page. There are those who object for other reasons as well. To some, the simulation idea carries an echo of despair, reducing life to artifice, making beauty a kind of trick. If every mountain and river is only a rendering, do they lose their majesty? If every joy and sorrow is written in code, do they lose their meaning? Yet one might answer gently, does a poem lose its truth because it is written in ink? Does music lose its power because it is carried upon strings and air? Even if this world is simulated, it need not be diminished. The page may still be radiant, the song still worth hearing. Perhaps, instead, the simulation hypothesis invites humility. For if our world is an experiment within a greater mind, then we are part of something vast, though we cannot grasp its shape. We may not know the examiner, but we are still within the field of the question. We may never prove or disprove the theory, yet its presence reminds us of the limits of our knowing and of the possibility that our most basic assumptions about reality, solidity, independence may not hold as firmly as they seem. You, drifting, now may notice how the thought itself softens when released from certainty. We do not need to declare this world a simulation to feel the wonder of its strangeness. It is enough to notice the way physics behaves like code, the way probabilities dance like rendered pixels, the way constants rest so delicately at values that allow stars and life to exist at all. Perhaps it is coincidence. Perhaps it is design. Perhaps it is something we cannot yet imagine. Soon, we will step into another layer of this inquiry, one that bends the gaze inward. For even if this is not a simulation, even if no greater programmer exists, it still feels as though structure surrounds us, as though the conditions of our world are tuned to make life possible. This is where the anthropic mirror waits, reflecting back the question of why we find ourselves here at all. And so, like a river curving into its next bend, the thought carries us forward, quietly, patiently, inviting us deeper. From here, the path leads inward again, toward a mirror that does not stand in glass or silver, but in the very act of our noticing. The anthropic principle is its name, though one can carry it gently without labels. It is the simple recognition that we see conditions that allow us to see. Nothing more elaborate is required, and yet, within that simplicity lies a quiet paradox that thinkers have circled for generations. The principle begins as an observation so plain it almost vanishes. Into the background, the universe holds stars stable enough to burn for billions of years. The chemistry of carbon binds with patience and flexibility, allowing chains and structures that become proteins, cells, eventually minds. The Earth circles within a narrow band of distance from the Sun, neither frozen nor scorched, and the atmosphere wraps itself with the right balance of gases to breathe. We look upon these conditions and marvel that they exist. But then comes the turn. Of course they exist, because without them, we would not be here to marvel. This is the heart of the anthropic idea. It does not insist the universe was designed for us. It only points out that any observers, by definition, find themselves in a universe hospitable enough to contain them. The fish may believe the ocean was made for its gills, but in truth, the gills only exist because the water shaped them. The mirror is not proof of intention, but it is still remarkable to stand before. Yet the thought is slippery. It can feel circular, almost tautological. To say we are here because the conditions allow us to be here seems at first like saying nothing at all. And still, when lingered upon, the phrase deepens, for the conditions are not trivial. They are not easily altered without collapse. A star slightly more massive burns too hot. A constant shifted by a hair, and atoms fall apart. The fact that the window is open wide enough for us to step through is itself astonishing, even if no one opened it with their hand. Some take this principle as a cooling breeze against grander speculations. Perhaps the world only looks tuned, as a test might, because life requires it. In a vast cosmos with countless variations, most regions may be barren, their rules too rigid or too loose for complexity. We inhabit the rare patch where things hold together long enough for awareness to bloom. And our presence here is not evidence of intention, but of survival bias. The test page seems perfectly aligned only because the other pages crumbled before anyone could read them. And yet, there is another way to gaze into this mirror. Even if the principle explains away the strangeness, it does not dissolve the wonder. Imagine again the fish, its fins trailing in water. It does not matter whether the sea was designed for the fish or the fish was shaped by the sea. Either way, the fit is breathtaking. So too with us and the cosmos. The alignment between fragile life and vast physics remains a source of awe, regardless of whether we attribute it to chance, necessity, or hidden design. You, drifting now, may notice the dual texture of this idea. On one side, it is comfortingly modest. It asks nothing more than logic demands, that we find ourselves in a world where finding is possible. On the other side, it is almost mystical, for it frames our very act of noticing as inevitable, yet extraordinary. Out of all the lifeless configurations, here is one that permits breath, thought, reflection. And here you are, in it, asking the question. This mirror also tempers the simulation hypothesis we just left behind. For if the world feels tuned, the anthropic principle whispers that tuning may not be deliberate, but conditional. Maybe it is not a test set by an examiner, but the simple fact that only in these conditions could candidates arise to even imagine being examined. The sensation of structure may belong to our perspective as much as to the cosmos itself. But like every mirror, it shows and it hides. What we see is shaped by where we stand. To say, The world must be this way, or we would not be here. Risks, overlooking all that is absent. Civilizations that might have been, but never were. Species that flickered briefly, then were gone. Entire landscapes of possibility erased before they could breathe. The anthropic mirror shows the survivors, not the fallen. It reflects us because we are here to be reflected, not because the universe meant for it to be so. And yet, in that limitation lies its haunting beauty. The mirror tells us that life perceives not in spite of difficulty, but because it has been carved to fit the narrow cracks where perception is possible. We may take it as reduction, or we may take it as invitation, to marvel that such cracks exist at all, that the silence of infinite barren plains has, at least once, yielded a voice. Soon, though our gaze must move beyond what the mirror reflects to what it omits. For every condition that allows us to be here, there are traces that have been lost, questions erased before they could be read. The record of earlier worlds is not always preserved. The chalkboard of Earth is wiped and written anew. And so, if we are to continue seeking evidence, we must turn to those missing questions, the erasures that shape what remains. From here, the mirror fades, and what we notice next is not what remains, but what has been lost. For if Earth were a test, some of its questions may already have been asked and erased, their traces washed away before we could even glance at them. The world has always been a restless surface, and that restlessness makes remembering difficult. Consider the mountains, tall as guardians of permanence, yet even they crumble. Rain drips, wind scours, glaciers carve. In a span of millions of years, whole ranges sink back into the sea, their sharp ridges softened into plains. The rocks that seem eternal are ground down into sand, and the sand is swept into oceans, buried, compressed, reborn. If some message were written in the stone, a careful carving left as evidence, how easily time would sand it away. A chalkboard wiped between exams, not with one stroke, but with endless soft brushes, until the marks are unreadable. The oceans, too, are erasers as much as they are archives. Their floors are restless conveyor belts. New crust emerges, pushes forward, dives back into the mantle. Any relic dropped upon the seafloor is destined to vanish, swallowed and melted, its story written over by molten rock. What little remains from ancient seabeds, fossils pressed into limestone, shells captured in cliffs, survives only because chance lifted them above the waves before the cycle could erase them. Most of Earth's record has been recycled, rewritten, forgotten, and civilizations, though they shine briefly with brilliance, are not immune. Entire cultures have risen, spoken, and dissolved into silence, leaving little more than pottery shards, faint walls, the ghost of language in later tongues. Many more may have vanished without leaving even that. Fire, flood, conquest, or the simple slow wear of time reduces their structures to dust. We walk atop ruins that once were homes, temples, marketplaces. The voices that filled them echo nowhere now. If Earth were a test, then many of its questions have already been scribbled upon, answered in human striving, and then erased before we could compare notes. Even memory, the softest kind of record, fades. Stories once told by firelight thin into myth. Myth dwindles into fragment. Fragment disappears altogether. What was once vivid becomes unknowable. We cannot recover every thought, every struggle, every small victory that once filled the centuries. The chalkboard is not only stone and sea, but the human mind itself, wiping clean what it can no longer hold. And beyond Earth, The erasures continue. Stars burn through their fuel and collapse into silence. Some explode, scattering the elements for new worlds. But even those traces spread thin across the void, diluted until the story cannot be pieced together. Galaxies drift apart, their light stretched until it fades into invisibility. What once was bright becomes unreachable, hidden behind the curtain of time's expansion. Even the universe itself seems to conspire in erasure, preserving little, keeping fewer answers than it destroys. You listening now may sense the paradox. We search for evidence that Earth is a test, and yet the very stage we stand upon is self-cleansing, endlessly eroding its own notes. What remains may be misleading, incomplete, or entirely absent. The chalkboard, freshly wiped, tells us almost nothing about what was written before. Perhaps that absence is accidental, or perhaps, if we stretch our imagination, it is intentional. For what better way to run a test than to remove the temptation of copying from earlier pages? Each attempt begins anew, unburdened by what came before. It might be unsettling to realize how much is gone, but there is also calm in it. The silence left by the erasures is wide, and within that space, imagination blooms. We are free to wonder because certainty has been removed. The missing answers are invitations, not denials. If nothing were lost, if everything were preserved, there would be no room for speculation, no space to ask whether we are part of something larger. The blankness itself may be part of the design, or perhaps only the natural drift of entropy, dissolving all patterns eventually. Soon, we will look at the possibility that the blankness is not mere chance, but an intentional veil. The thought that deeper truths might be hidden, not only by erosion or entropy, but by boundaries woven into reality itself. For perhaps absence itself is the evidence, the suggestion that what is concealed is not meant to be plainly seen. Now, let us drift further into the possibility that the veil is not merely the work of erosion or the accidents of time, but something more deliberate, more woven into the architecture of reality itself. What if the universe is not only difficult to read, but designed to be unreadable past a certain depth? Like a book whose last chapters are sealed, or a classroom where the exam questions are carefully worded so that hints of the answers cannot be gleaned too soon. Consider the black hole, a boundary unlike any other. When matter falls into its grasp, it vanishes from view, its information seemingly lost beyond retrieval. Physicists debate whether the data survives in some hidden form or is destroyed outright, but from the outside, the effect is the same: silence. A barrier that swallows storylines, erasing endings before we can read them. To approach too closely is to encounter a curtain that does not lift. If Earth were a test, perhaps such curtains are scattered across the cosmos, reminders that not every answer is ours to uncover. Then there is the speed of light, that invisible speed limit that holds the universe apart. Galaxies beyond a certain distance race away faster than their light can ever reach us. No matter how long we wait, no matter what tools we devise, their messages will never arrive. It is as if the exam paper itself has been trimmed, its edges cut off, preventing us from peeking at what might lie beyond. The veil is not malicious, but it is firm. We are confined to a particular horizon, a bounded field of vision. Perhaps that boundary is natural, or perhaps it is intentional, a cosmic proctor ensuring that the test is taken honestly, without glimpsing the answers from another room. Even closer to home, within our own minds, a veil persists. Human cognition is not limitless. We see only a narrow band of light, hear only certain frequencies, remember only fragments. Our thoughts are bounded by bias, by perception, by the sheer limitations of neural tissue. Beyond those edges may lie dimensions we cannot fathom, truths we cannot process even if they were presented. Perhaps reality is larger than our awareness can ever hold, and in that limitation, we find another form of censorship, not imposed from outside, but inscribed into the machinery of our own being. The thought may feel humbling, but it also carries a gentle wonder. What if the examiner, the unseen presence that designs the test, does not wish us to see the test too clearly? A paper handed to a student is not meant to reveal its grading rubric in the margins. The challenge lies in the attempt, not in the certainty. Perhaps black holes, light's barrier, and the filters of our own minds are like proctor's hands, ensuring that we face the questions without shortcuts, without answers pre-written in the corner. Of course, this is speculation. It may simply be the way nature works. Black holes as the natural end state of collapsed stars, light speed as a consequence of space-time's weave, our cognition as a product of evolution. And yet, to the one drifting through these thoughts, it is difficult not to sense the symmetry. The boundaries appear layered, as if too many curtains have been drawn in too many places for it to be coincidence alone. Maybe it is only our yearning for meaning that strings them together. Or maybe, quietly, they are strung together already. If you are drifting now, let that drift carry you gently. The unanswered questions will remain here, waiting. They do not rush. They do not fade when eyes close. They are simply part of the soft hum of existence. And when you return, the thought will still be here. That reality may be designed to conceal as much as it reveals. Soon, we will turn toward meaning. For if the evidence hides, if the clues are veiled and erased, perhaps the deeper significance of the test is not to be found in proofs and equations. If evidence hides, maybe meaning rests elsewhere. From the thought of veils and hidden answers, the mind drifts naturally to the most immediate and undeniable test that life has ever known. Before there were questions of meaning, before philosophy, before even the possibility of reflection, there was only one requirement: endure. Survive the night, survive the drought, survive the winter. Survival, in its simplest form, has always been the first question placed before every living being. And it has been asked again and again for billions of years, written not on paper, but into flesh and bone, into soil and air. Consider the single-celled microbes that first stirred in Earth's ancient seas. Their world was harsh, an ocean of shifting chemistry, volcanoes spilling fire, meteors striking from the dark. Yet, somehow, they clung to existence. They found ways to use light, to feed on minerals, to divide and persist. The exam was simple: continue or fall silent forever. Some failed, erased without trace. Others adapted, their answers written into DNA, carried forward into all the branching lines of life. As time stretched onward, the questions grew more elaborate. The oceans became crowded with creatures, each one striving against hunger and predation. The test deepened. To persist meant to feed, but also to avoid being food, to swim faster, to burrow deeper, to hide better, to strike first. In these waters, the test was not written in words, but in movement, in reflex, in tooth and scale. Nature, as the strictest of teachers, offered no second chances. Mistakes were not graded, they were eliminated. And yet, it was never only about the individual. Even then, cooperation emerged as another kind of answer. Microbes gathered into colonies, fish into schools, mammals into herds. Together they resisted predators. Together they endured. To survive meant not only to fight, but also to lean upon others, to share warmth, to divide labor. The test expanded beyond the body into the collective. Humans, too, have faced this same exam from the beginning. For our ancestors, every dawn was a question mark. Would there be enough food? Would the shelter hold against the storm? Would fire survive the night or flicker out in the cold? They answered not through certainty, but through trial. They carried flint stones, they wrapped themselves in fur, they followed the migrations of animals and the turning of the seasons. The exam was not offered once, it was offered endlessly, repeated every day, with every meal, every storm, every winter. Over time, humanity added a new dimension: memory. Fire could be preserved, but more importantly, it could be remembered. How to spark it, where to find it, how to carry embers wrapped in leaves across distances. Tools could be passed down. Stories of dangerous animals, poisonous plants, safe rivers, safe caves, all became threads in a larger net of survival. Cultural memory became a shelter of its own, invisible but powerful. The first question, once only about physical endurance, expanded into an exam of continuity. Would knowledge itself survive? There is a rhythm in this thought, a slow beat. Survive, survive, survive. Life has whispered it through every age. A fern unfolding in shadow, a wolf tracking prey through snow, a child taking her first breath. The question remains the same, though the answers multiply. Some adapt through strength, others through cunning, others through sheer numbers. Each is a response scribbled onto the paper of existence, some graded harshly, others permitted to continue. Yet even here, in this most basic test, there is room for reflection. Survival is not always conquest. Sometimes it is patience. The turtle withdrawing into its shell, the seed lying dormant for decades until rain returns. Sometimes it is fragility turned into persistence, like the mayfly that lives only a day but ensures continuation through countless offspring. There are as many answers as there are forms of life, each one a response to the same first question. For humans, survival has taken on deeper forms still. It has meant enduring not only hunger and cold, but exile, war, and loss. It has meant carrying songs across continents, planting crops in unfamiliar soils, rebuilding cities after floods or fire. In this sense, survival is no longer only physical. It is also cultural, emotional, spiritual. A lullaby whispered through centuries, a myth retold around fires, a ritual kept alive even when its origins are forgotten. These too are ways of enduring. Perhaps survival, at its deepest level, is not the persistence of bodies, but of memory, of meaning, of identity carried across time. And still, nature remains the strict teacher. Storms destroy cities as easily as they once toppled forests. Plagues sweep through populations, reminding us that the first exam never ends, never relaxes. Humanity builds walls, medicines, technologies, but the question is only delayed, never dismissed. In this way, survival ties us back to every creature that came before, reminding us that we are still candidates in the oldest examination of all. If you are drifting now, you might imagine survival as a thread, an unbroken line running from the earliest cells in the ocean, through every plant, every animal, every ancestor, all the way to you. A fragile thread, but strong enough to stretch across billions of years. It carries not only genes, but choices, adaptations, memories. Each generation has taken the exam and passed forward the chance for the next to try. But surviving, as demanding as it is, may not be the only lesson. Once existence is secured, once fire is preserved and food is stored, another question begins to stir. A question that cannot be answered by shelter or by hunger alone. It waits just beyond survival, as though the test deepens once the first response is written. Soon, we will turn to that deeper lesson. For surviving is not the only requirement placed before us. There are other questions, quieter but more profound, waiting patiently in the margins of the exam. From the first question of survival, another naturally unfolds, as if the exam of existence adds a second page once the first is filled. To endure alone is possible, but to endure together has always been more powerful. The story of life, and especially the story of humans, is inseparable from cooperation. Where one body is fragile, many together can become strong. Where one mind struggles, many minds together can imagine fire, shelter, and song. And yet, woven into this same lesson is its shadow, conflict. For every act of harmony, there has been division. For every moment of shared triumph, there has been rivalry and strife. Earth seems to ask, again and again, can you work together, or will you turn against one another? Long before cities and nations, the first tribes discovered the necessity of numbers. A lone hunter could fall to a predator, but a group of hunters could drive even the largest beast into traps. A solitary child might perish in the cold, but a circle of families could build fires and shelters, passing warmth from one body to the next. Strength in numbers was not only physical, it was a matter of spirit. Shared vigilance, shared song, shared ritual gave life a texture of safety. In these small circles, the earliest form of cooperation was graded, and those who learned to share, to trust, to defend one another, endured longer than those who splintered apart. With time, cooperation expanded into something more intricate. When people began to settle, to farm, and to trade, survival itself was no longer only about hunting or gathering. It became about sharing resources across distances, about trusting others not to cheat or betray. Trade routes stretched across, deserts, rivers, and seas. Strings of cooperation linked villages into towns, towns into cities, cities into civilizations. This was a new kind of test. Could humans trust one another across miles, across generations, across cultures? Treaties were written, alliances forged, currencies minted. Each one was an attempt at mutual reliance, a fragile bridge suspended over the chasm of suspicion. Sometimes these bridges held, allowing cultures to flourish in peace. At other times they cracked, and the fall was devastating. Wars erupted, civilizations collapsed, empires crumbled. Conflict, in this sense, may be seen as a failed exam in cooperation, a mark of what happens when trust is broken. Yet even conflict can be a kind of lesson, sharpening awareness of what is lost when harmony is destroyed, pushing groups to try again, differently, in another form. You might picture this as a classroom where collaboration itself is graded. Each species, each culture sits at a desk, attempting answers together. Some whisper across the aisle, passing ideas. Some isolate, trying to work alone. Others disrupt, tearing pages or scattering ink. The teacher, if there is one, does not appear, but the grades are returned nonetheless, measured in flourishing or collapse, in harmony or ruin. The test of cooperation is ongoing, and its results are written not in scores, but in the survival of cultures and the peace of generations. Conflict, though painful, has shaped the exam as much as cooperation. Rivalries have driven innovation, fortifications, weapons, strategies, but also healing, diplomacy, and law. A tribe that once fought another may later join in alliance. A nation that wages war may, in time, form treaties that endure for centuries. In this way, conflict becomes both failure and catalyst. It reveals how fragile cooperation is, but also how necessary. The contrast sharpens the lesson. Without trust, without compromise, existence shrinks back into isolation and risk. If you are drifting now, you might imagine the Earth itself as a vast stage, where cooperation and conflict take turns as the central actors. In one era, harmony dominates, trade flourishing, cultures exchanging music and knowledge. In another, conflict rises, wars tearing through the very fabric of that trust. Yet the play continues, never stopping, as if the lesson must be rehearsed again and again until it is truly understood. Beyond the human story, this lesson echoes in nature itself. Ants build colonies where millions work in seamless unison, each tiny life contributing to the whole. Bees weave hives of remarkable order, producing honey no individual could create alone. Yet in other corners of the living world, conflict prevails. Predators stalking prey, territories fought over, species clashing until one disappears. The Earth does not show preference. Both cooperation and conflict are permitted, as if the exam accepts both answers, but judges which are sustainable. Perhaps cooperation is not simply about kindness or morality, but about efficiency, endurance, and the broadening of possibility. Alone, a human can hunt, but together, humans can write music, build bridges, map stars. Cooperation unlocks futures that isolation cannot. And perhaps conflict is the reminder that such futures are fragile, that trust must be tended like a fire, or it will vanish into smoke. Cultures have long wrestled with this duality. Religious texts speak of brotherhood, of love, of turning enemies into neighbors. Philosophers have debated whether humans are naturally good and cooperative, or naturally selfish and combative. History offers evidence for both, as though the classroom has not yet reached consensus. Perhaps this uncertainty is itself part of the test. If you, listening now, imagine your own life, you might see this lesson mirrored in smaller ways. Every friendship, every family, every workplace asks the same quiet question. Will you work together or fall into rivalry? Even within the mind, there is cooperation and conflict. Desires pulling in opposite directions, impulses needing to be balanced. The test is everywhere, scaled from the smallest interactions to the fate of entire civilizations. And yet, even with all this weight, the lesson remains strangely tender. Cooperation is not only about survival, it is about joy. The laughter shared, the song sung together, the meal prepared in company. These are not merely strategies for enduring storms. They are experiences that give existence its richness. Perhaps Earth's test is not only whether we can cooperate, but whether we can find meaning, beauty, and belonging in that cooperation. Still, conflict is never far, and perhaps that too is part of the design. If it is a design, without conflict, cooperation might be taken for granted. Without discord, harmony might lose its value. The two together carve out the shape of human existence, like shadows defining light. So the second question lingers. Can we, with all our differences, find ways to remain together? Sometimes yes, sometimes no. The exam continues, its results written into history. And yet, even as cooperation and conflict shape our path, there remains another layer. For survival and working together are not the end of the test, only its beginning. Beyond them lies something more reflective, something quieter. As though once the first lessons are written, the exam turns the page to deeper questions. Soon, we will turn toward that reflective space, where the human mind itself becomes both the subject and the examiner. From cooperation and conflict, another thread slowly emerges, as if woven beneath the surface of both. To survive is one thing, to work together is another, but to turn inward, to notice the very act of being, introduces an entirely new dimension. Awareness of self, fragile and luminous, might be the most curious question Earth has posed so far. For in self-awareness, life not only exists, but wonders about its own existence. It is as though the exam shifts from practical challenges of hunger and storms to a subtler page filled with riddles. What are you? What does it mean to know that you are? Humans, perhaps uniquely or perhaps not, are beings who can wonder. They gaze at water and not only drink, but see their reflections. They notice the seasons and not only prepare for harvest, but ask why the cycles turn at all. They write symbols on cave walls not only to mark events, but to express something unseen within. This capacity to reflect transforms the test. It is no longer about endurance or alliance, but about meaning. When a creature can ask, "Why am I here?" the exam deepens into territory no storm or predator could ever threaten. Philosophy may be one of the earliest answers humans tried to scribble in the margins of this great exam. Across time and continents, thinkers have written their responses in the form of questions, paradoxes, and gentle speculations. Some claimed the self was an illusion, a flicker of perception. Others believed it to be a divine spark, placed intentionally. Still others saw it as the natural outcome of complexity, like a flame that appears when fuel and oxygen meet. Each answer is tentative, provisional, as if the margins themselves invite sketching rather than certainty. Art, too, becomes part of this response. When a poet describes the sorrow of longing, or a painter captures the stillness of twilight, they are writing their awareness into the margins of existence. These expressions do not solve survival, do not ensure cooperation, and yet they endure because they reveal something vital: the recognition of the self in relation to the world. A song about grief is an answer to the exam that no predator could. Demand no hunger could force, yet it matters deeply to the ones who sing it. Perhaps self-awareness is not simply another question in the exam, but the real passing mark. To notice that one is alive, to hold that recognition gently, may be the hidden requirement all along. For without awareness, survival is mechanical. Cooperation is instinctive, but with awareness, they become meaningful. A human who helps another can not only perform the act but feel the choice, sense its moral weight, and wonder at its beauty. Still, awareness is double-edged. To know the self is also to know finitude, to recognize the inevitability of loss. With awareness comes the haunting realization of mortality, of impermanence. Perhaps this, too, is part of the exam, the challenge hidden within the gift. To be aware is to balance wonder with sorrow, curiosity with fear. And yet, perhaps the true measure is whether one can remain tender in the face of that knowledge, to keep asking, creating, and connecting despite it. You, drifting now, might sense this in your own thoughts. To feel the rhythm of your breath, to recognize it as yours, is already a form of awareness. To wonder about the words flowing here, to notice your mind drifting between them, is itself a quiet participation in this exam of self. The very act of listening, of being present to these ideas, is a sign of the same capacity we trace back through centuries of art and philosophy. the capacity to turn inward and notice. The emergence of self-awareness in humanity might be seen as the exam moving into higher levels. At first, questions were about endurance, food, shelter, safety. Then about cooperation, trust, treaties, belonging. But now the page asks, do you recognize yourself as a participant? Can you notice the I eats test while taking it? In some ways, it is like a riddle that reveals itself only to those who step back far enough to see the pattern. Religions across the world have treated self-awareness as sacred, interpreting it as the breath of a creator, the awakening of a soul, the spark that connects human beings to something beyond. Others, in more material traditions, have framed it as the natural flowering of evolution, the inevitable byproduct of nervous systems reaching a certain threshold. Whichever view one holds, the outcome is the same. Awareness opens new questions that cannot be asked by any other species, at least so far as we know. And yet, one might ask, what if awareness is not rare? Dolphins, elephants, great apes, they show signs of recognizing themselves, of grief, of play, of reflection. Even certain birds solve puzzles that suggest glimpses of awareness. Perhaps the exam is not exclusively human, but written into life itself, waiting for many species to open the same page in their own way. If so, humanity is not alone at this desk, but one of many test takers, each scribbling answers in different scripts. There is something humbling in the thought that awareness may be both universal and fragile. It might flicker across different forms of life, appear briefly in one species, and fade in another, yet always serve as a reminder of what the test could be measuring. The earth seems to whisper, it is not enough to endure, not enough to gather together. You must also notice that you are here, that you are writing upon these pages. Perhaps this is why so much of human history revolves around questions of identity, selfhood, and purpose. Entire civilizations have been shaped by how they define the self, as isolated, as communal, as divine, as fleeting. The answers vary, but the act of asking unites them. Awareness may be less about what the answer is and more about whether the question is carried at all. If we extend the metaphor, one could imagine awareness as a mirror placed upon the desk during the exam. The test taker looks down to write, but then catches sight of their own reflection. They pause, realizing that the act of answering is itself part of what is being measured. How do they react to their own gaze? With fear, with pride, with humility. That too is part of the grade, though no number is ever written. So the lesson unfolds, gently and without end. Awareness is itself a form of participation. To know the self is to join in the great questioning. To express that self, in thought, in art, in philosophy, is to leave traces in the margins for others to find. Perhaps passing is not about certainty, but about carrying the question well. And from here, another transition rises, quiet and inevitable. If self is a lesson, then so too is the moral. For awareness is not the end of the exam, only the preface to the next page, where the questions of right and wrong, good and harm, are written in even finer ink, carrying forward from the mirror of self-awareness. Another layer quietly unfolds, as though the exam deepens with every page turned. If to notice the self is one question, then to notice others, and the threads that bind lives together, may be the next. The moral question arises, not as thunder or command, but as a soft whisper woven into every choice. Will you act with kindness? Will you care beyond yourself? Religions through the ages have often framed life explicitly as a trial with judgment. In their stories, the earth becomes not only a dwelling place, but a proving ground, where each action, each intention is weighed. heaven and hell, liberation and rebirth. All these visions cast morality as central to the test, a set of questions written into the heart of existence itself. The faithful are told, "Live rightly," and the examiner will mark your passage with reward, falter, and the grade will be consequence. In such narratives, morality is not optional, but the very rubric by which the exam is scored. Yet beyond religion, secular traditions have carried the same question in quieter, more uncertain ways. Ethical philosophies suggest that even without an overseer, the choices made between right and wrong matter profoundly. One does not need an eternal judge to feel the weight of fairness or the sting of cruelty. Morality, in this frame, is a test, written into the fabric of social life. To live among others, one must learn to balance self-interest with the well-being of those around. It is a curriculum of empathy, trust, and restraint, played out not in temples, but in marketplaces, homes, and communities. Perhaps the test is not survival alone, nor cooperation for advantage, but something subtler. Can we care beyond ourselves? Can a being, aware of its own desires, also pause to imagine the needs of another? When a mother bird shields her chicks with her wings, when an elephant stands vigil over a fallen companion, when a human stranger reaches out to help, all of these gestures suggest that life itself nudges creatures toward moral recognition. The moral question, however, is never straightforward. To act kindly may sometimes conflict with survival. To show fairness may demand sacrifice. History is filled with moments where humans have wrestled with the balance, whether to protect one's tribe or to welcome the outsider, whether to obey authority or defend the innocent, whether to seek advantage or uphold fairness. In this sense, morality is not a single question, but a series of dilemmas, recurring and unresolved, like a test that never ends but shifts its form with each generation. You, listening now, may recognize this tension in your own quiet moments. To pause before an action, to weigh whether it harms or heals, is already to engage with the moral exam. It is not always clear which answer is correct, and perhaps that is part of the design. That the struggle itself, the hesitation born of care, is what matters. The philosopher might suggest that morality is an emergent property, arising naturally from beings who must live together. The mystic might claim it is a divine law, written deeper than stone or sky. The scientist might see it as a product of evolution, selected because empathy aids survival. And yet, whichever story one leans toward, the same refrain returns: morality tests whether we can extend our concern beyond the narrow boundary of the self. Consider how civilizations have encoded this question. Laws and codes, commandments and constitutions, all are attempts to give structure to moral choices, to turn whispered questions into visible rules. But rules, too, are fragile. They can be broken, bent, or ignored. And when they are, the underlying exam reveals itself again. How will humans act when no one is watching, when no punishment looms, when only conscience remains? Perhaps the most haunting version of the question is this: if morality matters, who or what records the answers? If there is an examiner, then the ledger lies beyond human sight. If not, then morality may still matter, not for judgment after life, but for shaping the texture of life itself. Every act of cruelty corrodes trust. Every act of kindness plants continuity. The test may not be about passing or failing in some ultimate sense, but about whether we weave a world where others can breathe a little easier. Morality also stretches forward in time, across generations. The choices of one age ripple into the lives of the next. A forest preserved, a story passed down, a kindness taught. These endure beyond the moment, evidence that moral answers do not vanish when the page is turned. If morality is part of the exam, then it is graded not only in edicts, the moment, but in the echoes that follow. And still, one must hedge. Perhaps morality is no exam at all, only the way life happens when beings with empathy and awareness interact. Perhaps it is an accidental side effect of consciousness, not a deliberate question written in the fabric of existence. Yet even if it is accidental, it carries weight, for it shapes how life is lived and remembered. Maybe it is. Maybe it isn't. Maybe it never was. The uncertainty itself is part of the rhythm, reminding us that the test, if it exists, is never declared in clear ink. It is hinted, felt, intuited, but never confirmed. Soon, another thought will surface, one that grows naturally from this one. For if morality is asked, if kindness, fairness, and empathy are possible criteria, then so too is the question of meaning. What does it mean to live rightly? What does it mean to live at all? Morality opens into the next inquiry. Softer, still, the search for significance, for purpose, for the quiet thread that ties all questions together. If survival is the first lesson, cooperation the second, and morality the third, then perhaps the last page of the exam, if such a page exists, bears the most delicate question of all. It does not come with diagrams to solve or equations to balance, but with silence, a space where only reflection fits. It is the question of meaning. Why are we here? What is all this for? From the earliest fireside gatherings to the towers of modern cities, humanity has been carrying this question like a lantern through dark corridors. It lights only a little at a time, just enough to see a few steps ahead. Yet without it, the way would feel unbearable. Myths were the first flames, stories of gods shaping earth from chaos, of worlds balanced on the back of turtles, of tricksters and heroes whose adventures offered reassurance that existence was not random, but woven with purpose. These tales stitched human life into a cosmic fabric, placing birth and death within a story larger than the self. Science, in its turn, became another kind of myth, not false, but structured, explanatory, ordered. Where ancient stories spoke of gods tossing lightning, science spoke of charges and clouds. Where myths spoke of creation from divine breath, science spoke of stars fusing elements in their fiery cores. Yet the underlying gesture is the same: to give shape, to make sense, to seek threads of meaning in a universe otherwise indifferent. Both myth and science, in their different dialects, are attempts to answer the lantern's call. And then there are the personal stories, quieter but no less powerful. A parent who finds meaning in raising a child. A poet who threads meaning through words. A wanderer who finds it in landscapes. A thinker in questions. A healer in care. These do not answer the cosmic why, but they fill the corridors of daily life with light enough to move forward. Meaning here is not given from above, but discovered in practice, written in small acts, whispered in fleeting joys and sorrows. Yet, meaning is slippery. Each answer generates another question. Religions splinter into sects, philosophies into schools, sciences into theories. Each points, but none can hold the whole. The lantern reveals the wall ahead, yet when the corner is turned, the darkness extends again. And so the search continues. Maybe this is the deeper truth, that the test is not about finding the answer at all, but about continuing to ask, to keep the lantern lit, to resist the temptation of declaring prematurely that the corridors end. For if there is a design, perhaps it is woven not into the answers we write, but into the act of writing itself, the persistence of inquiry, the refusal to let the silence swallow curiosity. There is humility in this, to admit that meaning may not be a destination, but a process. Like music, whose value lies not in the final note, but in the unfolding of melody. Life, too, may be the song itself, not a riddle waiting to be solved. And still, the longing remains. Humans cannot help but wonder if somewhere, beyond the veil, there lies a key that makes sense of the whole composition. Consider the metaphor of a student in an exam hall who realizes near the end that perhaps the examiner never expected a perfect answer. Perhaps the questions were meant not to be solved, but to shape the student's thinking, to reveal how one wrestles, how one grows. Meaning, then, is not a fixed solution, but a mirror of our engagement, a record of how earnestly we searched. The quest for meaning also reveals itself in art. Paintings that linger on the mystery of light, poems that collapse lifetimes into a single image, songs that capture longing more deeply than prose ever could. These are not final answers, but offerings, fragments carried by the lantern's glow. Each one is a margin note in the exam booklet, a trace that says, "I was here, I wondered, I tried to see." And what of the possibility that no meaning exists? That the corridors extend without end, indifferent to the lantern's glow? For some, this prospect feels despairing, but others find liberation in it. If no meaning is given, then meaning can be made. Life becomes not a puzzle to solve, but a canvas to paint. The absence of an official answer frees us to write our own. Still, the suspicion lingers that the very act of searching is itself significant. To hunger for purpose may be part of what it means to be human, an instinct as essential as breathing or eating. Just as the body requires nourishment, the spirit requires wonder. Perhaps meaning is less about the universe providing us with a reason, and more about us responding with curiosity, with creativity, with care. The lantern metaphor returns here with gentle force. It is not the vast hallway that defines the journey, but the light we carry with us. Every time we ask why, every time we tell a story, every time we pause to consider our place, the lantern brightens. It may never reach the end of the corridor, but perhaps it does not need to. Its purpose is not to banish the darkness, but to help us walk within it. And so the exam continues. Maybe the test is to search without certainty, to accept mystery without surrendering inquiry, to live as though meaning matters even when meaning is elusive. This is not resignation, but resilience. The willingness to press forward, lantern in hand, even knowing the halls may never yield a final room. If survival tests our endurance, cooperation, our ability to live together, self-awareness, our recognition of mind and morality, our capacity for care, then the quest for meaning may be the exam's last and most subtle challenge. Not a question to be answered, but a journey to be sustained. And if these are our questions, carried here on this small planet, under this particular sky, what of others elsewhere? Are we the only ones walking with lanterns? Or do other beings, under other suns, also wander corridors, also pause in wonder, also search for meaning in the silence? Now, let us drift further into the silence of the stars. For if Earth itself feels like a hall of lessons, it is natural to wonder whether other classrooms exist beyond our horizon. The answer, at least in part, is already before us. In the last 3 decades, astronomers have found not just a handful, but thousands of distant worlds orbiting stars far away from our own. They are called exoplanets, and they stretch imagination as much as they stretch the boundaries of science. Some resemble our own Earth, rocky spheres balanced in the gentle warmth of their suns, where liquid water might pool in valleys or oceans might spread wide under alien skies. Others are stranger by far, worlds locked so tightly to their stars that one side burns in perpetual day, while the other side freezes in eternal night. Gas giants whirling so close to their suns that their atmospheres boil and stream away into space like great cosmic banners. Planets with seasons longer than human history, where a single winter could last for centuries. And even colder spheres, wandering starless between galaxies, wrapped in darkness, yet perhaps still holding warmth deep within. Each of these discoveries unsettles the imagination. For if Earth is a testing ground, a place where survival and meaning are drawn out through experience, then what of these other worlds? Could each of them be classrooms as well, their conditions writing different questions into the exam? A world of endless storms might test endurance and adaptation. A planet where day never yields to night might test the rhythm of perception, the ability to adjust to light and shadow as constants. And an ice world drifting without a sun might test the ingenuity of life to draw warmth from within rather than from above. In this view, the universe becomes less a void of scattered stars and more a vast campus of possibilities. Each planet, a syllabus. Each environment, a different question posed to life. Some exams may be mercifully brief, extinguishing attempts before they can flourish. Others may allow eons of practice, whole civilizations rising and falling before the chalkboard is wiped clean again. The variety is staggering, and yet the theme remains: conditions that shape, boundaries that guide, landscapes that instruct without words. Consider the oceans of Europa, the icy moon of Jupiter. Beneath its frozen crust lies a hidden sea, dark, yet restless. If life stirs there, it would be a curriculum written in water and ice, where survival depends not on sunlight, but on chemical whispers rising from vents in the ocean floor. Or Titan, with its lakes of methane and skies of orange haze. Any students there would breathe not oxygen, but something unimaginable to us. Their lessons, their tests, would not be ours, yet perhaps they would be no less real. And what of planets, where life never begins? Are they empty classrooms, waiting forever for students who never arrive? Or are they reminders that not every test must be taken, not every hall must be filled? Silence, too, can be part of the design. A blank page left in the middle of the exam, reminding us of what could have been, but never was. The sheer number of exoplanets discovered suggests that classrooms may be everywhere. Nearly every star appears to host worlds, and many stars host more than one. The cosmos, it seems, does not write its curriculum sparingly. Instead, it scatters possibilities like seeds, letting time and chance decide which will sprout into life. And if so, then Earth is not unique in being a place of lessons. It is only one desk among countless others in a hall so vast we cannot yet see its edges. There is humility in this realization. For so long, humanity imagined Earth as singular, a jewel suspended in emptiness. But the more we look, the more we find ourselves surrounded by potential classmates, even if we do not yet see them. And though the distances are immense, light years of separation, oceans of space we cannot yet cross, the imagination leaps easily. What would a student on another planet look like? Would they too ask why? Would they too carry lanterns into corridors of mystery? Or would their questions be so different, so alien, that we would not recognize them as questions at all? Speculation deepens here. Perhaps every planet teaches a different theme, and the universe as a whole is less a single test and more a collection of parallel exams, some focused on survival in harsh climates, others on cooperation in abundance, others still on awareness and meaning in entirely different contexts. A multiform pedagogy of existence, scattered across billions of classrooms, each testing for something particular, each erasing and rewriting its own record over the span of ages. But the thought carries a softer reflection too. Classrooms without students remain incomplete. A desk is only a desk when someone sits down to learn. A world without life may hold beauty, but without minds to see it, its lessons dissolve into silence. And so the question lingers in the quiet between stars. How many of these classrooms are filled? How many students are out there, writing their answers even now? Soon, we will turn toward that question. For classrooms are only part of the story. To test implies a learner, a presence to be tested. And if the universe is filled with potential exam halls, then we must ask gently, who else might be seated at the desks? Carrying that thought onward, the mind drifts from empty desks to those that might be occupied. If Earth is a classroom, perhaps it is not the only one with students. The silence of the cosmos weighs heavily here, for despite decades of listening, no voices have yet replied. Radio dishes sweep the sky, straining to hear a single whisper from another intelligence, yet the stars remain quiet. This silence can be unsettling, almost like walking into a vast library and finding every table empty, though the lamps are still lit and the books still open. Some thinkers have suggested that this quiet means others may have taken the test and failed. Civilizations may have risen on distant worlds, discovered fire, agriculture, mathematics, and philosophy, only to stumble at questions of survival or morality. Perhaps they used their cleverness to build tools too dangerous to control, or ignored the fragile balance of their environments until collapse came. The cosmic silence could then be the echo of many failed attempts, tests graded harshly, with lessons unfinished. Others imagine the opposite, that silence belongs not to failure, but to passage. A civilization might grow so advanced that it no longer lingers in classrooms like ours. Having mastered the lessons of survival, cooperation, and meaning, they might move on, leaving only quiet behind. If so, the absence of voices might not be tragic at all, but simply the sign of a graduation ceremony we are not yet able to witness. Between these poles of failure and transcendence lies a middle ground, that other students are still seated at their desks, working through their questions, much as we are. They may be learning survival under skies filled with multiple suns, or discovering morality in oceans that cover their whole world. They might even be grappling with meaning while gazing at constellations we will never see. Each would be wrestling with their own version of the same exam, though the details of their papers may differ. It is humbling to imagine such parallels. We tend to see humanity as singular, the only cohort of its kind. Yet the possibility of alien candidates reframes us as one among many. A class scattered across galaxies, separated by distance but united in the quiet rhythm of questioning. Like a group of travelers in different rooms of the same inn, we may never meet, but we are all guided by the same night sky overhead. Consider what it would mean if another civilization were also asking about cooperation. On Earth, tribes learned long ago that strength was found in numbers, that a shared hunt brought greater safety than solitary effort. Perhaps somewhere else, a different species, under different conditions, discovered the same principle. Their cooperation might involve signals of light flashing across oceans of methane, or subtle vibrations in alien atmospheres. Yet the principle that survival often requires trust may echo universally. Or think of morality. On Earth, empathy arises from shared experience. The cry of a child, the gaze of another's eyes, the recognition of pain. Could it be that empathy in some form is not unique to us, but a natural lesson wherever minds emerge? If so, then morality itself might be a test written into the very fabric of intelligent life, repeated across planets like a refrain in a cosmic song. The same with meaning. We fashion myths, philosophies, and sciences in our effort to interpret existence. Perhaps somewhere else, on another world beneath another sky, a different species tells different stories, paints different symbols, and weaves different philosophies, all reaching toward the same unreachable horizon of purpose. Their questions would not be our questions, yet the act of asking might place us within the same curriculum. The silence, then, becomes both haunting and comforting. Haunting because it leaves us uncertain whether others exist at all. Comforting because it allows us to imagine freely, to fill the stillness with possibilities rather than conclusions. It is like hearing no voices in a distant corridor. We cannot know if it is empty, or if students there are simply whispering in languages we cannot yet understand. For those drifting in thought, it may be reassuring to imagine that humanity is not alone in its struggle. We may be one cohort among countless others, each at a different stage of the test. Some might be at their beginnings, fumbling with survival. Others could be deep in the moral chapters. Still others may already be reaching toward meaning. And though we cannot see them, the parallel effort creates a sense of quiet kinship. It may be that the silence of the cosmos is deliberate, part of the test itself. Just as in an exam hall, where each student is expected to work independently, perhaps communication is withheld until the test concludes. This notion casts our isolation in a different light, not as loneliness, but as structure, a necessary separation that ensures each cohort writes its own answers without copying from the next. And yet, the thought persists. Somewhere, out there, others may be writing too. If so, the universe becomes a vast classroom with students we cannot see, each bent over their papers in silence, each working under the same mysterious examiner. Humanity, then, is not a solitary candidate, but one among many, a member of a larger class whose size we cannot yet measure. From here, the mind begins to wander toward wider possibilities still. If there are many classrooms and many cohorts of students, perhaps the test itself expands beyond a single world, or even beyond a single universe. What might it mean if the questions we wrestle with are part of a still greater syllabus, one layered across realities themselves? From here, the imagination drifts further outward, into spaces that may not even be spaces, into realms that may not be reachable, yet still invite speculation. The thought of the multiverse rises, a hall of mirrors, a gallery of possibilities, a corridor lined with infinite doors. Each door, when opened, might reveal another universe, complete in its own right, governed by rules that differ slightly or vastly from our own. Some physicists speak of bubble universes, each forming like a bead of foam upon a larger cosmic sea. In one bubble, gravity may be a little stronger, pulling matter too tightly to allow galaxies to form. In another, gravity may be weaker, and stars never ignite, leaving worlds in eternal darkness. In yet another, chemistry might fail to bind at all, leaving nothing but a diffuse haze of unshaped particles. Each bubble is a test variation, a different exam sheet, with margins and questions rearranged. And within one of those countless bubbles lies Earth, our specific version, with ink arranged just so, with margins wide enough for life to scribble its answers. If this is true, then the existence of our world may be less surprising. Out of infinite attempts, at least one classroom would contain students. The lesson is not necessarily that our world was designed for us, but that some universe somewhere had to allow observers, and we are simply seated in that particular hall. Like a dice rolled endlessly, the improbable outcome is not strange. It is inevitable, given enough throws. Yet inevitability itself can feel wondrous. To imagine that among infinite barren classrooms, ours happens to be furnished with chalk, desks, and the breath of students lends a sense of fragile fortune. It is as though countless tests are handed out blank, but one carries faint writing, enough to be read, enough to be answered. You, drifting now, inhabit that rare paper where the ink lingers. The multiverse, if it exists, reshapes the idea of Earth as a test. Instead of one singular exam crafted with intention, we might be part of an infinite experiment, where variation itself is the teacher. Perhaps every possible arrangement is tried, and among those trials, some will inevitably allow life, and of those, some will allow intelligence, and of those, some may even allow reflection on the test itself. Our universe, then, is not necessarily chosen, but surviving. It is one paper that has not yet been erased or discarded. But the idea of infinite classrooms raises another question. Is there a unifying curriculum? If each bubble universe is governed by its own rules, are all tests teaching the same lesson, or are they entirely unrelated? One could imagine that in some, cooperation has no meaning because beings never arise. In others, morality may be unthinkable because awareness never flickers into existence. Yet in a few, perhaps scattered sparsely across the foam, beings emerge who struggle with survival, with empathy, with purpose, the same familiar syllabus written in alien ink. In this vision, the multiverse becomes a testing ground, not just for life, but for meaning itself. Perhaps only in rare universes does meaning even become a question, and only within those rare halls do students lift their heads and wonder if they are in an exam at all. Our presence here suggests that we may occupy such a rare hall, a classroom, not empty, but humming with questions that echo against its silent walls. It is worth remembering that this is speculation, fragile as mist. The multiverse may never be proven, may remain forever beyond the reach of our instruments. But even as a thought experiment, it reframes our place. No longer is Earth alone on a singular page, but one line among endless variations. This perspective humbles the ego, yet it also softens the fear of uniqueness. If countless attempts are made, then the existence of life somewhere becomes less miraculous, yet our particular version remains quietly precious. Think of it like a library where infinite books are written, most filled with nonsense, most unreadable. Yet among them, a few contain stories, and among those, one is open before you now. The existence of the library explains why stories exist, but the experience of the story still matters. Meaning is not erased by abundance. If anything, the abundance makes the few coherent stories all the more treasured. And so, the multiverse invites us to imagine infinite exams written across infinite pages, with ours among them. We may never know how many others are legible, how many other classrooms hold students, but the very possibility broadens the scope of the test. Instead of one localized trial, there may be a grander experiment, with variation as the method and survival as the measure. Perhaps, too, the multiverse is not an accident, but a structure. Some have suggested that infinite universes ensure that failure is never final, that questions are asked again and again until, somewhere, an answer emerges. In this sense, The multiverse is merciful. No matter how many blank pages are turned, eventually one will be filled. And maybe that is all that is required. That existence keeps attempting until meaning is found. This leads gently to another thought. If our universe is one among countless, it may also be part of something more layered still, a nesting of realities, where within one test lies another, and within that, yet another. Could it be that the exam is not only written across universes, but folded within them, a structure repeating like Russian dolls? That possibility draws us softly forward, toward the thought that even within our own universe, the test might be nested in ways we have not yet glimpsed. Carrying that thought onward, the idea of layered tests unfolds, like pages tucked inside other pages, each containing questions that mirror the one before. If the universe itself could be a simulation, then why stop at one? A simulated world might, in turn, give rise to its own simulations, each indistinguishable to its inhabitants, each believing itself to be the base layer. And so, the structure begins to resemble a hall of mirrors, a recursive chain where every exam is written upon the back of another, endlessly nested. It is a thought that tempts both awe and vertigo. Imagine exam papers stacked in a tall, teetering tower, each graded by the one above, yet never reaching the final examiner. At the bottom, students struggle to answer, never seeing the layers that hold their questions in place. At the top, if such a top exists, lies the original paper, the first question, the true test. Or perhaps there is no top at all, only an infinite regress, tests within tests without end, each a rehearsal for the next. Human imagination has already toyed with this nesting. In stories and games, simulations create smaller worlds, digital landscapes where characters act, unaware they are scripted. Children draw houses where inside the windows are children drawing houses. Writers craft tales where the protagonist is also an author, penning his own tale. Gamers step into virtual realms where characters themselves might design their own games. Each layer mirrors the one above, a reflection folded within reflection. If such recursion is possible in our modest inventions, perhaps it is echoed on a grander scale. Our own simulated world, if it exists, might have birthed its own digital realities, which themselves might give rise to further creations, and so on, extending downward into layers as fine as silk. From the perspective of those inhabiting the deepest layer, reality would appear solid, unquestionable. Yet it would be but one page in an endless exam booklet. There is an unsettling humility in this vision. If reality is nested, then certainty becomes elusive. To prove that one inhabits the base reality would be almost impossible, for any evidence discovered could itself be simulated, any observation part of the script. Each layer believes itself to be the true exam hall, even as it rests inside another. Perhaps this is why the suspicion feels inescapable. No matter how deeply one peers, there could always be another wall, another veil, another examiner beyond sight. Yet there is also a strange comfort here. If existence is recursive, then meaning may not rely on finding the ultimate layer. The test might not be to discover the highest examiner, but to live authentically within whichever hall one occupies. A student in a classroom still writes the answers, regardless of whether the school itself stands within a larger campus or whether the campus itself is part of a city simulation. Each layer holds its own lessons, its own quiet integrity. Think of dreams within dreams, where one awakens only to find oneself still asleep, another reality waiting beneath. The dream may not be less real to the dreamer within it, for in that moment it holds weight, sensation, consequence. If life itself is layered, then perhaps reality is less about the base and more about the immediacy of the experience. The feel of the ink, the sound of the questions, the chance to write one's answer. Recursive realities also whisper of purpose. If each layer creates another, then creation itself may be the syllabus. Perhaps the test is not merely to survive or to cooperate or even to notice, but to generate new worlds, to build simulations that reflect and refract meaning onward. In this way, humanity's own games and digital experiments become practice exercises, small echoes of a much larger curriculum. Each new virtual world we make may be our attempt to imitate the exam we are part of, to sketch another margin inside the cosmic paper. But then comes the lingering question: how does one pass such a test? If there are many layers, what counts as success? Is it enough to complete the answers in one haul? Or must one somehow break through, reaching the layer above? Perhaps passing is not about escape, but about depth, about answering well within the constraints given, showing awareness not only of the ink and the page, but of the possibility that there may be more pages unseen. The possibility of endless. Nesting also blurs the line between examiner and examinee. If we are simulated and we simulate, then we are both tested and testing, both student and teacher. Meaning may reside in that duality, in learning enough to create, in creating enough to teach, in teaching enough to become examined once again. Like a spiral, the roles fold into each other, looping upward and downward without a final point. It is not necessary to decide whether this vision is true. Perhaps it is only metaphor. Perhaps it is only dreamlike speculation. But even as a thought, experiment, it stretches the imagination, softens certainty, and opens the possibility that life is both question and answer, both classroom and chalk, both ink and reader. And so, the idea of nested simulations leaves us in a place of quiet wonder. Each layer may be a page in a larger book, each exam a fragment of a grander syllabus. Whether finite or infinite, designed or emergent, the recursion itself teaches humility. That knowledge may always be partial, that beyond every horizon might lie another, and another still. From here, the path widens toward a larger reflection. If there are many tests stacked one inside another, then it matters deeply to ask, what counts as passing and what counts as failure? And so, the next wondering emerges, quietly waiting, carrying forward from the thought of nested layers and hidden examiners. The natural question rises with a kind of quiet inevitability. If life is a test, then what does it mean to pass? And equally, what does it mean to fail? The language of classrooms makes the question feel simple, as though answers were tallied and scores recorded in some unseen gradebook. Yet when one leans closer, when one lingers with the question rather than rushing it, the edges blur into something far more mysterious. Across centuries, religions have offered some of the most enduring responses. In one vision, passing the test means heaven, a realm beyond suffering, where the soul rests in eternal peace or joy. The exam in this framing is not endless. It is a gateway, a corridor one walks through before arriving at a brighter hall. In other traditions, graduation is less final, more cyclical. Life leads to rebirth, the paper handed in only to be replaced by another, the lesson repeated until mastery is shown. Here, passing is enlightenment, a clarity so profound that one no longer needs to return to the classroom. Other teachings offer more subtle milestones. In some, success is not measured by what one avoids or gains after death, but by how one awakens during life. To pass is to see clearly, to live with compassion, to walk with humility. The grading is not in the heavens but in the heart, not beyond the veil but in the small gestures of kindness, patience, and forgiveness that ripple outward through human days. For those who do not turn to religious frames, the question still lingers, refracted into secular visions. Here, passing may be measured in legacy, what remains when the body has gone. Perhaps to pass is to be remembered kindly, to have built something that endures, whether a family, an idea, or a work of art. In this view, the exam is written in stone and story, in institutions that outlast the individual. Memory becomes the grade, and the remembrance of others is the certificate. Another secular reading suggests that the only real graduation is continuation itself. Life begets life, and to pass may mean nothing more than to keep the thread unbroken, to ensure the species, the community, or even the fragile weave of ecosystems survives. In this sense, graduation is not an end point, but a passing of the torch, each generation keeping the candle alight for the next, ensuring that the classroom does not empty, that the questions remain asked, and there is yet another possibility, gentler and more elusive. Perhaps the question of passing is the wrong question. Perhaps the test is not graded in the way we imagine. Consider a lantern carried through a darkened corridor. Its value is not in where it arrives, but in the light it gives along the way. If life is a lantern, then passing may not mean escaping the corridor at all. It may mean simply to have carried the light, however briefly, however faintly, in a world that would otherwise be darker. There are, of course, quieter failures implied in these visions too. Religions often warn of hell, of punishment, of wandering lost in cycles without awakening. Secular frames might see failure in forgotten names, in choices that erode rather than nurture, in futures closed rather than opened. Yet even these failings may not be absolute. They may themselves be lessons folded back into the exam, missteps that still teach, still matter, still ripple into meaning. A failure in one test may be the preparation for another. A wrong answer, the spark that ignites, the courage to try again. If graduation exists, its markers may be subtle, more like whispers than proclamations, a life lived with empathy, a question asked sincerely, a connection made across the fragile bridge of loneliness. These may be small notes, but together they could form the music of passing. It may not require perfection. It may only ask persistence, attention, kindness. The curriculum may be less about mastery than about participation, less about flawless answers than about showing up again and again, willing to write something on the page. There is a humility in imagining that continuation itself is the only diploma, not heaven, not enlightenment, not legacy, but the ongoing hum of life itself, the continuation of rivers flowing, forests breathing, children growing, ideas sparking. Perhaps we graduate simply by ensuring the classroom remains open. For others, the desks filled, the questions still waiting to be asked. Passing, then, would not be individual, but collective, a quiet stewardship of the exam hall itself. And perhaps, at the softest level, the idea of passing or failing dissolves entirely. If the universe is layered, recursive, infinite, then the exam may not be scored at all, but lived. To pass may mean nothing more than to be here, to notice, to feel wonder. To fail may mean nothing more than to forget, to turn away, to live as though the questions did not matter. In this view, the very act of asking what it means to pass is itself a gesture toward passing. The curiosity itself is a lantern, lit against the dark. These speculations do not resolve, but that may be their quiet gift. They do not hand us a grade at the bottom of the page, but they invite us to write differently, to live as though the questions matter. In this way, the exam is both weightless and profound, both fragile and enduring. Each breath may be a line of the essay, each choice a part of the answer, each kindness a small check mark in a margin we cannot see. And so, the thought circles gently back to earth. Whatever graduation might mean, whether heaven or memory or simple continuation, it always begins here, with this soil, this breath, this fragile classroom. If the universe holds other layers, other schools, other tests, they remain beyond the veil. For now, we come home, to earth, to rest, to the place where our questions first begin. From the long corridors of speculation and the vast archways of possibility, the path now curves gently back to where it began, to the simple, haunting question that first drew us forward. What if Earth is a test? The words sound no less strange, for having been spoken before, but perhaps now they echo differently, resonating in chambers they did not reach at the beginning. In the early moments, the question may have felt sharp, almost like a riddle posed by a hidden examiner. Now, after drifting through galaxies and myths, through classrooms of stone and oceans of silence, it feels softer, wider, more like a cloud than a command. To ask whether Earth is a test is, in one sense, to measure life against the frame of schooling. A human invention, a metaphor borrowed from chalk and parchment, from classrooms where lessons are given and judgments rendered. But in another sense, it is simply to notice patterns of challenge and response, of trial and growth, of struggle and renewal. Seeds must push against soil. Rivers carve their way through rock. Creatures adapt or perish. Survival, cooperation, awareness, morality, meaning, all have appeared like questions written on invisible pages, questions asked again and again across the expanse of time. Looking back, the beginnings of this speculation were tentative, almost hesitant. Life as curriculum, struggle as lesson, awareness as final question. Yet now, with distance, the question feels less like a demand for an answer and more like an invitation to reflect. Perhaps Earth is a test, perhaps it is not. Perhaps the trials are lessons, or perhaps they are only the blind churnings of matter and chance. The uncertainty does not erase the beauty. In fact, it may deepen it. Imagine for a moment the classroom metaphor at its most vivid. Earth as a schoolhouse suspended in darkness, its chalkboards wiped clean by erosion and entropy, its lessons written in the rings of trees and the strata of stone. Generations of students come and go, each leaving faint notes in the margins. No examiner appears, no bell rings to mark the end, and yet still the questions are asked, by microbes, by forests, by civilizations, by you listening now. The silence of the examiner does not erase the questions. The questions live on, regardless. And then imagine the other possibility, that there is no exam at all, no grading, no hidden overseer. Life may simply be what it is, a burst of chemistry flowering into awareness, a fragile lattice of chance that bends briefly into self-reflection before dissolving again. If so, then the question itself becomes part of the wonder. The fact that matter, arranged into neurons and breath, can ask what if at all. Perhaps the test is only the noticing. Perhaps the act of asking makes meaning, even when no answer arrives. It might be that both framings, exam and non-exam, are useful mirrors. One draws us toward responsibility, reminding us that actions matter, that choices ripple outward like ink on water. The other draws us toward acceptance, reminding us that not everything requires explanation, that peace can be found in simply being. Together, they hold a balance, the urgency of care and the calm of surrender. And so, as the circle closes, the question remains open, not resolved, not silenced. It is the kind of question meant not for solution, but for contemplation. Like a koan whispered by ancient teachers, its power is not in an answer, but in the way it reshapes the one who asks. Perhaps Earth is a test. Perhaps it is not. In either case, life is still life, full of hunger and kindness, of storms and songs, of endings and beginnings. There is a quiet assurance in knowing that uncertainty is safe. The cosmos has always held more than we can know, more than we can explain. To live without certainty is not a failure. It is a condition of being alive. Just as a bird does not need to solve the sky to fly through it, we do not need to solve the universe to dwell within it. The questions can remain unanswered, and still the path unfolds. Still the lantern glows. Still the river flows onward. You, drifting now, may feel the comfort of that uncertainty. You do not need to decide whether Earth is a test, or merely a stage, or only an accident. It is enough to wonder. It is enough to breathe within the mystery. Whether the exam paper exists or not, whether graduation waits or not, the present remains. This breath, this quiet moment, this fragile awareness that you are here at all. Soon, the reflection will carry forward toward the calm assurance that whether yes or no, peace remains. The ambiguity does not diminish the beauty. If anything, it makes the beauty more tender, more precious, like dew that clings for only a moment before dissolving in the sun. For now, it is enough to linger with the question itself, to let it float gently in the space between thought and dream, like a feather carried by still air. And so the question waits, not demanding, not insistent. What if Earth is a test? What if it is not? The answer, if there is one, can remain unwritten. The wondering itself is already enough. Carrying the question softly in the palm of thought, one begins to notice that the not knowing is not a void to be feared, but a spaciousness that cradles life gently. It is easy, perhaps natural, to imagine that certainty would soothe us, that a clear verdict, a firm conclusion, would quiet the restless mind. Yet, again and again, it is the opposite that proves true. Certainty narrows, it closes doors. Uncertainty, by contrast, opens them, leaving corridors unlit and paths still waiting to be walked. There is rest in that openness, a freedom in not having the final word. Not knowing can be a form of release, like setting down a heavy book whose ending you do not need to rush toward. It allows you to linger with the page before you. Perhaps Earth is a test. Perhaps it is not. Maybe it is both, or neither, or something stranger still. Whatever the truth, the moment remains, this simple now. The air moves in and out of lungs. The stars burn quietly in their distances. The river carries its current whether or not anyone names its direction. In a world where much is fleeting, perhaps the greatest comfort is to allow uncertainty to stay beside us as a companion rather than an enemy. It need not be a shadow at the edge of sight. It can be a lantern itself, not revealing the whole landscape, but illuminating a small circle of ground on which we may walk. To know everything would be to exhaust wonder. To not know is to let wonder remain alive. Life's value does not depend on the verdict of whether it is examination or accident, curriculum or chaos. A child's laughter rings with meaning regardless of cosmology. A mountain's stillness holds its majesty, whether it was sculpted for a test or not. Love is no less profound because the rules of the universe remain unanswered. To live in unknowing is not to live without meaning. It is to live within meaning's mystery. Think of a sky filled with clouds. One may not know whether the shapes are random or whether they gather into patterns unseen, but the beauty of the sky is unchanged. Or think of music. A melody does not need to declare its purpose for its notes to move us. Perhaps existence itself is a melody. No chorus of explanation, no refrain of certainty, only a flow that continues, moment by moment, sufficient in itself. Maybe it is. Maybe it isn't. Maybe that is enough. These words could be repeated, like a mantra, a lullaby for the restless mind. They do not solve, they do not conclude, but they soothe. They turn the question itself into a rhythm, a gentle tide that laps against the shores of thought. Perhaps Earth is a test. Perhaps it is not. Perhaps the wonder lies not in discovering, but in asking, again and again, with tenderness rather than urgency. You, drifting now, do not need the answer to rest. The comfort of unknowing is that it allows the mind to soften, to loosen its grip on outcomes. Life does not wait for verdicts. It does not suspend itself until certainty arrives. It unfolds, whether or not the script is revealed. To breathe, to dream, to love, to ponder. These are not delayed by mystery. They are enriched by it. Soon, the thought may arise that unknowing is not only restful, but essential. For if everything were laid bare, if every question were answered, there would be no wonder left to carry us forward. Wonder grows only where mystery still lives. And so uncertainty, instead of being a gap to be filled, becomes the soil from which awe arises. From unknowing flows imagination, from imagination flows meaning, and from meaning flows peace. In this way, the uncertainty that once felt like a riddle transforms into a lullaby. It need not unsettle. It need not disturb. It can instead be a quiet field in which to lie down, the stars above uncounted, the questions unanswered, and yet the rest, complete? Perhaps it is. Perhaps it isn't. Perhaps that is enough. And from this unknowing, the next current begins to flow. A current of wonder, of marveling not despite uncertainty, but because of it. From the comfort of unknowing, the mind begins to notice how the same questions we carry now have been whispered long before us and will be murmured long after. Across centuries, across languages, across the fragile paper of memory, the inquiry persists. It is as though time itself has been the great recorder, capturing not the answers, but the echoes of asking. Ancient myths, carved into stone and sung around firelight, asked what we ask now. Who are we? Why are we here? Is there a hidden pattern to existence, or is it all a tide without direction? Priests and poets, prophets and philosophers leaned into those same uncertainties. Some painted the sky with gods, others traced cycles of rebirth, others sought order in numbers and stars. Each was an attempt, however incomplete, to sit with the riddle of life. And then science, centuries later, rose not as an opposite, but as another form of myth-making. Equations replaced sagas, telescopes replaced temples, but the echo remained. The same hunger for meaning, for understanding, resounded. To map the orbit of planets, to name the structure of atoms, was not only to measure, it was to ask again and again what it all meant. The modern physicist and the ancient storyteller share a kinship of wonder, a lineage of uncertainty carried forward like a torch. Time becomes a thread, stitching these seekers together. Imagine it, a long tapestry, stretched across millennia, woven with voices that never heard one another, yet speak as though in unison. Each question is a stitch, each reflection a knot, and the pattern is less in the answers than in the continuity of longing. What was asked in temples of Mesopotamia finds a shadow in the laboratories of today. What was pondered by shepherds beneath stars finds a mirror in your quiet wondering now. And so you, listening here, are part of that same echo. The breath of your own wondering joins this chorus. The unspoken questions drifting in your thoughts tonight are not solitary. They resonate with countless others who have looked at the sky, at their own reflection, at the fragility of life, and felt the same pull toward mystery. You are stitched into that fabric, a thread among threads, a voice among voices. This recognition softens the sense of isolation. To know that others have carried the same uncertainty is to find belonging. Across ages, the human mind has rested not in certainties, but in the shared act of asking. A child in ancient Egypt who marveled at the sun rising over the Nile was no less a philosopher than the modern thinker staring into the glow of galaxies. Each gaze held wonder. Each gaze carried the echo forward. Perhaps this is time's quiet gift, to remind us that we are not the first to wonder, and will not be the last. Our questions may never resolve, but they reverberate, filling the corridors of history with music that does not fade. Even when civilizations collapse, even when libraries burn, the questions return, reborn in new forms, reframed in new languages, carried again by new seekers. The persistence of asking is itself the echo. It may be imagined like standing in a vast cavern, where one's voice meets the stone walls and returns softened, layered, multiplied. Humanity has been speaking into such a cavern since its beginnings, and still the echoes return. They do not bring new answers, but they remind us that the act of calling out matters, that the sound of seeking is itself a form of meaning. You, too, are part of this echo. Your wonder tonight does not vanish when it leaves your mind. It joins the chorus, invisible but real, stitched into the invisible fabric of time. And in that recognition, perhaps one feels the comfort of belonging not only to the present, but to the endless lineage of seekers before and after. And with that echo, we soften. The sharpness of the question blurs into song. The urgency fades into resonance. We do not need to hold the question alone, for it is shared, endlessly shared, across the great river of time. From that echo which softens across time, we return, now to something closer, something deeply personal, something that belongs to you. You, listening here, in this moment, in this night. You have carried the questions far enough for now. You have turned them over gently, held them against the quiet, and felt their weight and wonder. That is enough. You have asked enough for tonight. There is no verdict to reach, no conclusion demanded, no secret to uncover before sleep comes. Rest itself may be the most profound answer we can offer. To lie down, to release, to drift, that is its own kind of participation in the aid test, if such a test exists at all. Perhaps the measure is not in ceaseless thought, but in the willingness to allow stillness, to let the mind fold into calm. In that way, your sleep is not an absence, but a gentle offering, an affirmation that life does not always require solving. Before resting, you are safe. You are here. You can rest. The words are not commands, only reminders, like stones set softly along a path, so you may walk without fear of losing your way. You are safe. You are here. You can rest. Let the repetition wrap around you the way a blanket might, familiar and steady, carrying the weight of reassurance without asking anything in return. If the mind still circles, if a question flickers, like a candle refusing to be blown out, remember, the candle can burn without your watching. It will wait. Tomorrow it will still be there, and the next day, and the next. Nothing is lost by sleeping now. The questions are patient. They will not vanish if you set them down for a while. In truth, they may even grow clearer when seen after rest, as dreams give them new shapes, as silence polishes their surfaces in ways waking thought cannot. Sleep is not withdrawal from the great inquiry. It is part of it. Every night, the body carries out its mysteries. Every night, the mind wanders corridors that waking reason cannot map. Sleep is the quiet experiment that never ceases, the rehearsal of surrender, the rehearsal of renewal. In resting, you participate. In sleeping, you join the current of all life that pauses, that folds inward, that renews. You are safe. You are here. You can rest. Allow those words to drift closer, to settle like soft snow falling on a still landscape. They carry no urgency. They do not ask for effort. They are already true. Your safety does not depend on solving the riddle. Your presence is already established. Rest does not need permission. It simply waits for you to allow it. Imagine the earth itself beneath you, steady, unshaken, carrying your weight without question. Imagine the sky above, unhurried, infinite, without demand. Both continue regardless of answers. Both hold you as you drift. Sleep is not leaving them. It is aligning with them, entering into their rhythm of pause and continuation. And so, the night becomes not a test to pass, but a shelter to enter. The darkness is not emptiness, but a gentle enclosure, a cradle wide as the world. You do not need to stay awake to guard against it. You do not need to prove your worth before it accepts you. The night already accepts you. You are safe. You are here. You can rest. The words may repeat until they no longer sound like words, but like a hum, like a rhythm, like the steady sound of waves. With each repetition, the body softens a little more. The breath deepens a little further. The space between thoughts lengthens until thoughts themselves begin to dissolve. And if the mind insists on one more worry, one more fragment of speculation, let it. It may pass through you like a cloud, seen and then gone, needing no resistance. Rest is not a door to guard, but a horizon to approach slowly, gently, without force. You are already moving toward it. This is the final wind down, the gentle closing of the day's inquiry, not by solving, but by surrendering. You have asked enough for tonight. You have wondered enough. Now wonder itself can sleep. The echo can rest. And you, too, can rest. You are safe. You are here. You can rest. And now, traveler, who has walked so far with me through these long corridors of thought, we arrive at the quietest threshold. Every question we have carried, every speculation we have unfolded, rests here at the edge of night. You have journeyed across time and space, from the birth of stars to the silence of black holes, from the rise of civilizations to the hush of memory, and at last, you come home to yourself. Sleep well, traveler. The test, if ever it was a test, can wait. The pages do not need to be filled tonight. The answers do not need to be written in the margins. The examiner, if such a figure exists at all, asks nothing of you now. The only task is rest. The only mark to make is the closing of your eyes, the soft surrender to dreams. You are already enough. In your questions, in your wonder, in your simple being here, you have done more than enough. There is nothing further to prove. The stars do not ask you to shine as they do. The oceans do not ask you to move as they move. You are enough as you are. A traveler who has asked, who has listened, who has drifted this far. Let the word enough sink into you, not as a limit, but as a fullness. Enough means complete. Enough means whole. Enough means you may set down the weight, unclench the hand, and close the eyes without loss. You do not need to reach farther tonight. You have already arrived. Sleep well, dreamer. The night waits like an open shore, and you may step onto it without fear. The waves are slow and forgiving. They will carry you inward, away from effort, away from burden, into the wide interior sea, where thought can dissolve into rhythm. Sleep well, listener. The voice that has carried you through this wandering will quiet now. The words will thin, like mist, until there is only breath. And then not even breath, only the silence in which dreams take root. You are already enough. You do not need to solve the riddle. You do not need to pass the exam. If life is a test, it is a test that welcomes rest as part of the answer. If life is not a test, then it is simply a journey. And journeys require pauses, require sleep, require stillness. Imagine yourself as a traveler setting down a lantern at the end of a long road. The flame continues, but you no longer need to hold it. You can let it burn beside you while you rest. You can trust that it will light again when you wake. Imagine yourself as a dreamer stepping into a meadow at night. Stars overhead, earth beneath, no path to follow, no destination to reach, only the gentle presence of being held within a larger whole. The meadow does not judge, the stars do not measure, the night does not demand. You are already enough. Sleep well, traveler. Sleep well, dreamer. Sleep well, listener. You are safe. You are here. You can rest. Let the silence now be the answer. Let the darkness be the reassurance. Let sleep carry you as gently as a tide, without resistance, without fear. You are already enough. Sleep well.